Hello everyone. I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. The silence in the apartment was a physical thing. It had weight, pressing in on me from the corners of the rooms, a constant reminder of the space Chloe used to occupy. Her absence was a ghost I lived with, her scent fading from the pillows, her favorite mug gathering dust in the cupboard. It had been 2 months since the breakup, and my life, once a shared narrative, had been brutally edited down to a solo performance. I was Alex Thompson, a 34-year-old history teacher, adrift in a 2-bedroom apartment in Coogee, Sydney, with nothing but the sigh of the Pacific and the ghosts of my own making for company. My routine became my raft. Wake up, run along the coastal walk, shower, stare at the blank wall where her painting used to hang, go to work, teach teenagers about the fall of empires, come home, grade papers, sleep. Repeat. It was a bleak, monastic existence, but it was structured. It was safe. The first crack in that structure appeared on a Tuesday. I was at my local cafe, the Salty Bean, waiting for my long black. Lean, the barista with the perpetually flour-dusted apron, slid the cup across the counter. "Rough day?" she asked, her smile kind. "Just the usual," I said, forcing a reciprocal smile. "Hey, have you seen Elise from my building lately? Haven't run into her in a while." Lean's brow furrowed. "Elise?" "Yeah, red hair, always carrying that massive cello case. Lives on the 4th floor." I mimed the shape of the instrument. "Hard to miss." She shook her head, a thoughtful frown replacing her smile. "Sorry, doesn't ring a bell. We get a lot of people through here." I shrugged it off. "No worries. Must be a morning regular." I paid and left, the rich scent of coffee following me out into the street. It was a non-event. Lean was relatively new, and Elise was a quiet, private person. It was perfectly logical that their paths hadn't crossed. Elise Vance. She was a cellist with the symphony, a woman who seemed to glide rather than walk. We weren't close friends, but we were friendly neighbors, the kind who'd share a lift and a 10-minute conversation about the weather or the building's ludicrously high strata fees. I enjoyed her company. In the quiet loneliness of my post-breakup life, those brief, mundane interactions were small points of light. The sound of her cello, faint and melancholy, would often drift down from her apartment on a Sunday afternoon, Debussy, usually. It was a sound that had become part of the building's unique atmosphere, as familiar as the cry of the gulls or the rumble of the lift. A week later, the second crack appeared. I was fumbling with my keys at my door when Mrs. Gable from 2A shuffled past, her small dog, Winston, trotting ahead of her like a furry little tyrant. "Afternoon, Alex," she chirped. "Mrs. Gable," I said, finally getting the door open. "Lovely day." I held the door for her. "Say, I was meaning to ask, have you seen Elise in 4B recently? Hope she's not unwell." Mrs. Gable paused in my doorway, Winston sniffing suspiciously at my welcome mat. She adjusted her glasses, peering at me as if I'd just sprouted a second head. "Elise, dear." "Who's that?" "The cellist. Red hair. Been living up in 4B for a couple of years now." A slow, deliberate shake of her head. "Oh, no, dear. You must be mistaken. Apartment 4B has been empty for nearly a year, since poor Mr. Henderson passed. They're still waiting on the estate to clear before they can renovate. It's been a whole saga, the body corporate is furious." My smile felt frozen on my face. "Mr. Henderson? He lived in 5C. No, no," she said with the unshakable certainty of the elderly. "He was in 4B. I took his mail in for him when he was in hospital. A lovely man. Hated pigeons." She gave me a final, pitying look, as if my grief over Chloe had finally scrambled my brains, and shuffled off down the hall, cooing at Winston. I stood in my own doorway, the cool air from my apartment washing over me. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Mrs. Gable was getting on, her memory wasn't what it used to be. That had to be it. She was confusing Mr. Henderson with someone else, confusing the apartments. But her certainty was unsettling. It was the kind of absolute, detailed conviction that's hard to argue with. I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart thudding a little too fast. I thought back. I remembered helping Elise carry a new bookshelf up the stairs just before Christmas. I remembered her giving me a bottle of wine as a thank you. I'd shared it with Chloe. We'd sat on the balcony, listening to the distant strains of her cello practice, and argued about where to hang the bookshelf. The memory was sharp, vivid, textured. It was real. How could it not be? Later that night, unable to focus on a documentary about the Peloponnesian War, I scrolled idly through the photos on my phone, a masochistic ritual of swiping through memories of Chloe and me. I found what I was looking for, a folder labeled, Building Barbecue, NOV22. I tapped on it. There were photos of the neighbors milling around the communal garden, sausages sizzling on the hot plate. There was a photo of me and Chloe, her head on my shoulder, a forced smile on my face because we'd been fighting that morning. And there was the photo. I remembered the moment clearly. I was standing by the grill, talking to Elise about her upcoming tour to Melbourne. My neighbor, David, a keen amateur photographer, had snapped a picture. "Smile, you too," he'd yelled. I looked at the image on my screen. I was there, holding a beer, smiling awkwardly at the camera. But beside me, where Elise should have been, there was nothing. Just an empty space. A patch of neatly trimmed grass, the brick wall of the building, the edge of the grill. It wasn't just that she wasn't there, the composition of the photo was wrong. There was too much empty space, an unnatural gap in the frame, as if the universe had forgotten to fill it. I zoomed in, my thumb trembling slightly. The pixels distorted, blurring my own face. No Elise. It looked like I was smiling and talking to thin air. A chill, profound and deeply unnerving, crept up my spine. My first thought was a desperate, grasping one, Photoshop. David must have edited her out for some reason. But why? It made no sense. My second thought was even more desperate, maybe she'd moved just as he took the picture. But I remembered standing there with her, the scent of her floral perfume mixing with the smoke from the barbecue. I remembered the specific joke she told about a clumsy percussionist. I put the phone down on the coffee table. My hands were clammy. This was what stress did, I told myself. This was what grief and loneliness did. It made you misremember. It made you see gaps where there were none. It made you invent conversations, entire people, to fill the void Chloe had left. The thought was terrifying, but it was more plausible than the alternative. The alternative was that the world was broken. That night, I called Chloe. Her voice was cautious, laced with the careful distance of a recent ex. "Hey, you okay?" she asked. "Yeah, fine. Just a weird question. Do you remember Elise? From my building?" There was a pause. "Elise? I don't think so. Should I?" The cellist. Red hair. We had that bottle of wine she gave us for helping with her bookshelf. Another, longer pause. The silence crackled down the line. "Alex, what are you talking about? Bookshelf? We never helped anyone with a bookshelf. And the only wine we got from a neighbor was that awful homemade stuff from the old guy in 5C. "Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Yeah, that's him. Listen, are you getting enough sleep? You sound stressed." Her concern felt like an accusation. She thought I was losing it. The worst part was, for a terrifying moment, I thought she might be right. "I'm fine," I lied, my throat tight. Just tired. Forget I said anything. We hung up, and the silence that rushed back in was different. It wasn't just empty anymore. It was watchful. I looked at the photo on my phone again. At the empty space beside me. A space the exact size and shape of a person. A person named Elise Vance. I was a history teacher. My life was built on evidence, on verifiable facts and primary sources. And the evidence was telling me something impossible, that a person I knew, a person I remembered, had never existed at all. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 2, Growing Awareness and Isolation. The weekend descended, bringing with it not rest, but a feverish obsession. The mystery of Elise Vance had sunk its teeth into me, and I couldn't shake it loose. To accept that she wasn't real was to accept a fundamental flaw in my own mind, a crack in the foundations of my sanity. I refused. I would find proof. I would vindicate my memory. My first port of call on Saturday morning was the building manager's office in the basement. Mr. Henderson, a different, very much alive Mr. Henderson who ran the building, was a man who worshipped at the altar of the spreadsheet. If a person existed within the walls of this building, he would have a record of it. He sat behind a gray metal desk, surrounded by filing cabinets and the faint smell of damp concrete. Thompson, 3B. What can I do for you? He grunted, not looking up from his monitor. I was hoping you could look up a past tenant for me, I said, trying to sound casual. For apartment 4B. He sighed, a long-suffering sound. Let me guess. The estate. Look, I've told their lawyer a dozen times, we can't proceed with the renovations until probate is granted. No, not that Mr. Henderson, I clarified quickly. The tenant before him. A woman named Elise Vance. I spelled the name out for him. He squinted at me over his spectacles, then turned to his computer. His fingers clicked on the keyboard with slow, deliberate thuds. The silence stretched. The hum of the old computer's fan filled the small office. Nope, he finally said, turning the monitor towards me. Nothing. According to this, Unit 4B was occupied by Mr. Gerald Henderson from March 2012 until his death last October. Before that, a couple named Patterson. No Vance. Ever. The screen showed a neat, orderly table of names and dates. It was absolute. Digital. Final. My own history was a fuzzy, analog recording. This was a crystal clear digital file, and it was telling me I was wrong. Could there be a mistake? I asked, my voice thin. A paper file, maybe. We digitized everything in 2015, he said flatly, already turning back to his work. The system is foolproof. If she's not in here, she didn't live here. His tone was dismissive, final. The conversation was over. I left the office feeling winded, as if I'd been punched in the gut. The world was presenting a united, bureaucratic front against my memory. My quest grew more frantic. I became a strange phantom in my own building, knocking on doors, asking the same questions. The response was universally the same. Blank stares. Confused headshakes. Pitying smiles. The cellist? No, I don't think so. 4B. That's poor Mr. Henderson's place. They were all in on it. Not a conspiracy, nothing so malicious. It was worse. It was a shared, placid reality from which I was the sole exile. They were all listening to the same song, and I was hearing a completely different melody, a phantom harmony that no one else could perceive. My isolation became a palpable thing. I started avoiding my neighbors, scurrying from the lift to my door, my gaze fixed on the floor. Their friendly greetings now felt like tests, their concerned looks like diagnoses. There's the history teacher who's gone a bit funny since his girlfriend left. I turned my apartment into a command center, a fortress against the encroaching madness. I bought a large whiteboard and mounted it on the wall where Chloe's painting had been. On it, I wrote, Elise Vance, in big, block letters. I began a journal, separate from my teaching notes, dedicated solely to her. I forced myself to write down every single memory I had of her, no matter how trivial. June 17, 2022, ran into her in the laundry. She was annoyed because someone had left a red sock in with the whites. We joked about the laundry bandit. She smelled of lavender. September 3, 2022, heard her practicing Bach's Cello Suite No. 1. I sat on my balcony just to listen. It was beautiful and sad. November 12, 2022, the building barbecue. She told me the joke about the percussionist who was always late because he couldn't find the right symbol of his commitment. The joke wasn't even that funny, but I remembered her laugh, a low, throaty sound. The journal was my anchor. These were not the ramblings of a damaged mind, they were historical records. My personal primary sources. The subplot of my life, my relationship with Chloe, continued its painful denouement. She called me on Tuesday, her voice tight with a carefully curated concern that set my teeth on edge. I spoke to my cousin, Jessica, she said. She's a therapist. She said she'd be happy to talk to you, no pressure. A therapist? I laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. You think I need a therapist because I remember a neighbor? Alex, I'm worried. You're obsessing. It's not healthy. People misremember things when they're under stress. This isn't misremembering, Chloe. This is an erasure. It's like she's been wiped clean from the world, and I'm the only one who didn't get the memo. Listen to yourself, she said softly, and that was the cruelest part. She was trying to be kind. You sound paranoid. Please, just talk to someone. The conversation ended with me hanging up, my hand shaking with a mixture of anger and fear. She was the voice of the world, the voice of reason, and it was telling me I was broken. The more I fought to prove I was sane, the crazier I sounded, even to myself. My search for a digital trace became all-consuming. I scoured the internet for any combination of Elise Vance, cellist, Sydney. Nothing. No social media profiles, no mentions in symphony programs, no articles. I remembered her telling me she was proudly analog, that she detested the curated falsehood of online life. At the time, I'd found it charming. Now, it was a curse. It made her the perfect person to disappear. How do you prove the existence of someone who took pains to never exist online? My mind kept circling back to the apartment. For B, the source. The one place where her physical presence had been most concentrated. According to the world, it was Mr. Henderson's old place. According to my memory, it was Elisa's. History is told by the victors, but what happens when history itself is being silently rewritten? Desperation breeds recklessness. One Thursday night, armed with a pounding heart and a terrible idea, I went upstairs. The hallway was empty, lit by a single, buzzing fluorescent tube. The door to 4B was blank, its brass numerals tarnished. I knew it was locked. I knew trying the handle was pointless. But I remembered something else, a detail surfaced from the depths of my memory journal. Elise had once complained about her finicky old lock. She'd mentioned keeping a spare key on a hook just inside the door, in case she locked herself out, and how she'd sometimes wedge the door just so, to get airflow. A long shot. An insane shot. I reached out and tried the handle. Locked. Of course. I slumped against the doorframe, defeated. My fingers brushed against my keys in my pocket. I pulled them out, a jumble of metal. My apartment key, my office key, my parents' house key, and Chloe's old key. The one to her parents' beach house in Avalon, which I'd forgotten to return. It was an old, simple brass key for a mortise lock, not unlike the ones in our building. On a whim born of pure, illogical hope, I slid it into the lock of 4B. It met resistance, then, with a jiggle and a nudge, it slid all the way in. I held my breath, my blood roaring in my ears. I turned it. A heavy, metallic clunk echoed in the silent hallway. The door swung inward, opening into darkness. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. The air that drifted out of apartment 4B was stale and dead. It smelled of dust, old plaster, and the faint, chemical tang of paint primer. My hand, still on the doorknob, was slick with sweat. For a moment, I was paralyzed, caught between the terror of what I might find and the terror of what I might not. Stepping inside was like crossing a threshold into an alternate reality, one that confirmed the world's story and refuted my own. The apartment was a hollow shell. The floors were bare wood, scuffed and scarred. The walls were a patchwork of white primer and exposed plaster, evidence of a renovation that had been started and then abandoned. There was no sign that anyone had lived here recently. No ghost of furniture on the carpets, no scuff marks on the walls, no lingering scent of lavender or old books. It was a blank slate, exactly as Mrs. Gable and Mr. Henderson had described. A wave of vertigo washed over me. My carefully constructed fortress of memory began to crumble. Maybe Chloe was right. Maybe this whole thing, Elise, the cello, the red scarf, was a complex, detailed hallucination, a story my grieving mind had concocted. But I was here now. I closed the doors softly behind me, plunging the apartment into near total darkness, broken only by the thin slice of hallway light under the door. I used my phone's torch to cut through the gloom. The beam danced across empty rooms, revealing nothing but dust motes swirling in the air. The living room, where the bookshelf should have been. The small kitchen, stripped of its appliances. The bedroom, where I imagined her bed once stood. Nothing. My methodical search felt like a desecration of a tomb, even if I didn't know whose. I ran my hands along walls, tapped on floorboards, checked inside the empty, cavernous closets. I was about to give up, to retreat to my own apartment and call Chloe's therapist cousin, when my light beam caught something odd. In the main living area, low on the wall near the floor, was a large, metal ventilation grate. It was an old one, the kind with adjustable slats. One of the screws holding it to the wall looked loose, its head stripped and shiny compared to the others. Kneeling down, I pried at it with my fingers. It was barely holding on. With a little wiggling, the screw came free. I pulled the heavy grate away from the wall. The space behind it was dark and choked with cobwebs. It was a ventilation duct, just as expected. But tucked deep inside, pushed almost out of sight, was a small, rectangular object. My heart hammered against my ribs. I reached in, my fingers brushing against something cool and metallic. I pulled it out. It was an old shoebox, heavy with dust. I blew the gray film away, revealing the faded Adidas logo. With trembling hands, I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of what looked like yellow tissue paper, was a small, silver portable cassette recorder, a Sony Walkman Professional, the kind journalists used in the 90s. Beside it were 6 cassette tapes, neatly stacked and held together with a rubber band. Each tape was labeled with a number, 1 through 6, in precise, elegant handwriting. And on top of them lay a single, folded piece of notepaper. I unfolded it. The same handwriting, in black ink, spelled out 2 words. For Alex. A tidal wave of emotion crashed over me, vindication so powerful it felt like a physical blow, followed by a cold dread that seeped into my bones. She was real. She had been here. And she had left this for me. I scrambled out of the apartment, the box clutched to my chest like a holy relic, and locked the door behind me, the clunk of the bolt sounding like a final, definitive statement. Back in the safety of my own fortress, I stared at the box on my coffee table. A cassette player. I hadn't owned one in 20 years. A frantic search through my own box of shame, the one containing old university textbooks, sentimental junk, and relics from a past life, yielded a miracle, my father's old Iowa Walkman, complete with a pair of tinny-sounding headphones. I blew the dust off it, inserted fresh batteries, and prayed it would work. With a shaking hand, I took the tape labeled 1 and slotted it into the player. The plastic door clicked shut. I put on the headphones, the cheap foam cool against my ears. I pressed play. There was a hiss, a click, and then, a voice. Is this thing on? Right. Test. 1, 2. The voice was her. It was Elise. Clearer than a memory, more real than a dream. It was her. The low, melodic cadence, the slight hint of a lisp on her S's. Relief, pure and potent, flooded my system. I wasn't mad. She was real. I laughed, a giddy, half-sobbing sound. Then I listened to what she was saying. My name is Elise Vance. I am a cellist. I live in apartment 4B at this address in Coogee. I'm making this recording because things are getting strange. And I need to document it, before I start to think I'm the one who's crazy. My smile faded. I leaned forward, my elbows on my knees, my entire being focused on the sound in my ears. It started small, her voice continued, calm but with an undercurrent of strain. It's about my neighbor. The history teacher in 3B. Alex. Alex Thompson. The blood drained from my face. He's a kind man, Elise said. Quiet. Always has a book with him. We chat in the lift sometimes. He helped me with a bookshelf just before Christmas. But the strange thing is, no one else seems to remember him. The room began to spin. I gripped the sides of my head, as if I could physically hold my reality together. I asked Lean at the cafe this morning if she'd seen Alex. Elisa's recorded voice narrated, a chilling echo of my own experience. She's known him for years. Always knows his order. But she just looked at me blankly. Alex who? She said. Then I saw Mrs. Gable in the hall. I asked her how Alex was doing. I know he's been down since his girlfriend, Chloe, moved out. Mrs. Gable told me apartment 3B has been empty for months, not since the young woman who lived there left. She said she felt sorry for Chloe, having to go through the breakup all alone. I stopped the tape. My breath was coming in ragged gasps. This wasn't possible. This was a nightmare. She was describing my reality, but casting me as the ghost. She was describing her own investigation, her own search for proof of my existence. The horror of my situation rearranged itself into a new, infinitely more terrifying shape. This wasn't about Elise vanishing. This was a process. A quiet, creeping contagion of non-existence. And Elise hadn't been the first victim. She had been the observer of the previous one. Me. She was documenting my erasure right before the same phenomenon turned its attention to her. The title of the story in my head, the one I had been living for weeks, remembering Elise, was a bitter, cosmic joke. All this time, I had been trying to remember the one person who had been trying to remember me. With a sense of dawning, abyssal dread, I took a deep breath and pressed play again, needing to hear the rest of the story, needing to know what happened next in the history of my own disappearance. Underscore 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 underscore. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. I didn't move for the next 3 hours. I sat there in the encroaching twilight, the only light in the room coming from the glowing screen of my phone, and listened to all 6 tapes. I listened as Elise Vance chronicled the quiet apocalypse of my own existence. Tape after tape, her voice, my only proof that she was real, documented the escalating weirdness. She described walking past my apartment and hearing nothing but silence, where once she'd heard the low murmur of my television or the clicking of my keyboard. She talked about finding a group photo from the building barbecue, and seeing a strange, person-shaped void next to Chloe. Her investigation mirrored my own, a perfect, horrifying symmetry. She'd gone to the building manager, who showed her a file where my name had been replaced with vacant. She'd tried to talk to Chloe, who had treated her with a gentle pity reserved for the tragically confused. The nature of the threat became clearer, though no less comprehensible. It wasn't an abduction or a conspiracy. It was a fading. A slow, systematic rot of reality. An ontological disease that erased a person not just from the present, but from the past, patching over the holes with plausible, mundane explanations. People's memories didn't have gaps, they were seamlessly rewritten. Mr. Henderson died in 4B. Apartment 3B was simply empty after Chloe left. The world abhorred a vacuum, and so it filled the spaces with quiet, sensible lies. On tape 5, Elise's voice began to change. The analytical calm was gone, replaced by a frayed, weary desperation. The fading, it's starting to affect me now, she whispered, her voice close to the microphone. My own memories of him are getting thin. Like a photograph left out in the sun. I can remember his face, but it's losing its detail. I can remember the sound of his voice, but I can't recall a single specific sentence he said today. Or was it yesterday? The timeline is blurring. She described other things, too. Sensory shifts. The hum of the building's electricity becoming painfully loud to her at night. Shadows in the corner of her eye that seemed to stretch and twist in unnatural ways. She was describing the symptoms of the next stage of the disease, the stage I had not yet reached. I think it's a place, she hypothesized, her voice cracking. Or a thing in this place. This building. It consumes a life to sustain itself, and then moves on to the next. The one who remembers the last victim is its next meal. The final tape was short. Her voice was barely a whisper, distorted by the hiss of the recording. It's my turn now. I can feel it. My name feels foreign in my own mouth. I looked in the mirror this morning and for a second, I didn't recognize myself. Just a woman with red hair. I hope this gets to you, Alex. I don't know how. Maybe the pattern repeats. Maybe you'll feel the echo of me, the way I felt the echo of you. Maybe someone has to remember, even for a little while. There was a long pause, filled only with the sound of her shaky breathing. My name is Elise Vance, she said, one last time, an act of defiance against the encroaching silence. I was a cellist. Then, a soft click. The tape ended. Static hissed in my ears. I took the headphones off. The silence in my apartment was no longer just the absence of Chloe, it was the absence of everything. It was the sound of the future. The sound of my own oblivion. The confrontation I had been seeking wasn't with a person or a monster. It was with a concept. I was facing my own erasure. I walked to the whiteboard, my monument to Elise. I looked at her name, written in my hand. Then I looked at my own hands. Did they look fainter? Was the light passing through them just a little? I picked up the whiteboard marker and, below her name, I wrote my own, Alex Thompson. I stood there for a long time, just looking at the two names. A history. A lineage of the forgotten. What was there to do? There was no fighting this. Elise had tried. She had documented, she had investigated, and in the end, the tide had simply washed over her. To flee would be pointless. The contagion wasn't in the building, it was in the memory. It was attached to me now. To run would be like trying to outrun my own shadow. I thought about calling Chloe one last time, to scream at her, to beg her to remember me. But what was the point? Her memory was no longer a reliable document. It was a forgery, beautifully crafted and utterly false. She would only hear the ravings of a man she used to love, now lost to grief. I walked over to my desk. In a drawer, beneath stacks of graded papers on the rise of the Ottoman Empire, was my own digital audio recorder. The one I used to record my lectures. I took it out. It was sleek and black, a modern counterpart to Elisa's analog relic. I turned it on. The small screen glowed to life. I pressed the new recording button. A small red light blinked, steady and patient. There was no box to hide it in, no ventilation grate to offer a slim chance of discovery. Who was I even recording this for? The next person in the chain. A faceless, nameless individual who would one day find themselves trying to remember a history teacher named Alex Thompson, and in doing so, punch their own ticket for oblivion? Maybe. Or maybe I was just doing it for myself. An historian's final, futile act, to create a primary source for a history that no one would ever read. A message in a bottle, thrown into an ocean of forgetting. I sat on my sofa, the recorder in my hand. Through the balcony doors, the sky over the Pacific was turning a deep, bruised purple. The first stars were appearing. Everything looked achingly beautiful, sharp, and permanent. A world that would go on perfectly fine without me. I brought the recorder to my lips. The red light glowed. "My name is Alex Thompson," I said, my voice steady and clear, a quiet defiance against the coming silence. "I am a history teacher. I live in apartment 3B. And I remember Elise Vance. The quiet contagion, the hum in apartment 4B. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. My world is built on a foundation of managed noise. Not the roar of the L train rattling my windows in apartment 4B, or the distant, mournful cry of sirens stitching the fabric of a Chicago night. That's the city's breath, predictable and, in its own way, comforting. The noise I manage is the one inside my own head. Tinnitus. Mine is a high-frequency E-flat, a constant, ethereal whine that has been my unwelcome companion since a feedback loop disaster during a live mixing gig 5 years ago. I am Alara, a freelance sound designer, and this persistent ghost note is the irony of my life. I spend my days cleaning up audio, isolating dialogue from background chatter, removing the hum of faulty wiring from podcast recordings, all while a phantom hum screams in my own skull. To cope, I live a life of sonic discipline. My apartment in the South Loop is my sanctuary and my studio. Acoustic foam panels, tastefully disguised as wall art, absorb stray frequencies. My Sennheiser HD 650s are less headphones than a second, more obedient set of ears. My routine is my metronome: wake at 7 a.m., meditate for 10 minutes to the white noise of a fan, work from 7:30 to 12:30, lunch, walk along the lakefront, then back to the digital grindstone until 6 p.m. Precision and control are how I keep the E-flat from winning. The new sound began on a Tuesday. It wasn't the E-flat. It was low, a bass note so deep it was more felt than heard, a subterranean thrumming that vibrated up through the floorboards. I pulled off my headphones, my own internal ghost note suddenly seeming thin and reedy by comparison. The apartment was silent, save for the city's distant pulse. I put the headphones back on, sinking into the clean audio of the indie horror film I was scoring. The director wanted a soundscape that felt organically unsettling. I knew the feeling. I dismissed it. Old building. Radiator pipes. The ancient elevator groaning in its shaft. Chicago is a city of groans and sighs. But the hum returned, always in the quiet moments. It was a 60-cycle hum, the kind I'd spent countless hours filtering out of audio files. But this one had a strange, velvety texture. It was clean, pure. Almost intentional. My first real inkling that something was wrong came via Mr. Henderson in 3B. A sweet, lonely widower whose life ran on the kind of atomic clock precision I admired. Every morning for the past 3 years, his door would click open at exactly 8:15 a.m. for his walk to Grant Park. You could set your watch by it. One morning, the click came at 8:22 a.m. I was in my kitchen, pouring coffee, and the deviation was so jarring I nearly dropped the carafe. It was a trivial thing, a 7-minute slip. Perhaps his alarm hadn't gone off. But the next day, it was 8:19. The day after, 8:24. The metronome was broken. I saw him in the lobby a few days later, collecting his mail. His usually crisp shirt was slightly rumpled, his kind eyes a little distant. "Morning, Mr. Henderson," I said. "Keeping well?" He turned to me slowly, a placid smile gracing his lips. "Oh, wonderfully, Elara. The building is so peaceful lately, have you noticed? It helps you think." He paused, head cocked. "Listen. It's like a song, isn't it? Very low. Very steady." My blood went cold. He was talking about the hum. But he wasn't annoyed by it, he was soothed. The oddities began to stack up like loose change. Jianli, the MBA student in 4A, was a perpetual motion machine, always jogging, talking on his phone, slamming his door in a rush. One evening, I opened my door to grab a food delivery and saw him standing stock still in the middle of the hallway, facing the wall. His head was tilted at that same listening angle as Mr. Henderson's. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't doing anything. He was just listening. "Jian?" I asked, my voice tight. He startled, not like someone caught doing something wrong, but like someone woken from a deep dream. "Oh. Hey, Ella. Just centering myself. Long day." He gave a weak, unconvincing laugh and scurried into his apartment. The contagion, if that's what it was a quiet one. It didn't announce itself with screams, but with silence. With stillness. With a shared, secret attentiveness to a sound I was professionally trained to eradicate. I started blaming my tinnitus. Maybe it was changing, evolving, spawning a low-frequency cousin to its high-pitched shriek. It was easier to believe I was the one who was broken. I saw my audiologist, Dr. Eris, a man with the weary patience of a saint. He ran the tests. "No change, Elara," he said, peering at the charts. "Your hearing loss is stable, and the tinnitus is exactly where it was at your last checkup. Are you under more stress than usual?" "No more than usual," I lied. How could I explain it? "My neighbors have started listening to the building and it's making them weird." I'd sound like the crazy woman from 4B, one step away from fashioning a tinfoil hat. The rationalizations became a mantra. It's old wiring. It's the L-train resonance. It's mass hysteria, a folie à deux spread across an entire building. It's my own damn ears playing tricks on me. But then came the rhythm. I was working late on a Thursday, the hum a constant, unobtrusive presence beneath the audio I was editing. I took a break, pulling off my headphones, and stood by the window. I watched the traffic on Roosevelt Road, the river of red and white lights flowing east and west. Then I noticed the lights in the apartment building across the street. A window blinked off. Then another. Then a third, in a steady, rhythmic pattern. Off. 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 A pause. On. 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 It was a slow, deliberate pulse. Like a heartbeat. And the hum in my floorboard seemed to pulse with it. From. I stumbled back from the window, my heart hammering against my ribs. My internal E-flat screamed in panicked protest. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't my tinnitus. The building was breathing. And the people inside were breathing with it. My carefully constructed world of managed sound was being invaded by a silence that was louder than any noise. The unsettling mundane had shed its disguise. Now, it was just unsettling. Phase 2, growing awareness and isolation. The slide from unsettling to terrifying was slick and silent. My freelance work, once a refuge, became a source of acute anxiety. Every 60-cycle hum I was paid to remove from a client's recording felt like a personal affront, a tiny, futile battle against an invisible, encroaching ocean. The world was full of hums, but this one was different. This one was learning. I began to document it. My sound designer's precision, usually aimed at creating fictional worlds, was now turned to deconstructing my own. I bought a new journal, a black Moleskine, and started a log. October 17, 9:14 p.m. Hum frequency measured at 59.8 Hz, felt strongest near the floor vent by the radiator. Mrs. Gable in 5B, usually watches TV until 11, turned her lights off. All of them. October 19, 7:02 a.m. Synchronized departure. Heard doors 4A, 4C, 4D, 4F open and close within the same 3-second window. Mine remained shut. Felt a pressure in the silence that followed. A sense of being out of step. October 22, 3 a.m. Woke up. Dead quiet. The hum was gone. For a full minute, there was only my tinnitus. Then, a low throb started, as if from a great distance, growing steadily. It peaked at precisely 60.0 Hz. In the hall, I heard a soft, simultaneous coughing from multiple apartments. The synchronicity was the most unnerving part. It was the anti-chaos of urban living. People left for work in clean, silent waves. The mail was collected from the lobby boxes in a 5-minute flurry of activity, after which the space would remain empty for hours. The evening return was the same, a tide of residents flowing in between 6 o'clock and 6:15 p.m. Then stillness. It was like watching a nature documentary about a hive, but the hive was my home. My isolation deepened. I was an island of discordant rhythm in a sea of eerie harmony. I tried, one last time, to breach the wall of placid acceptance. I caught Brenda, the building superintendent, in the basement. She was replacing a filter on the boiler, her movements slow and deliberate. The basement was the hum's cathedral. Down here, it was a palpable entity, a physical weight in the air. It resonated in my teeth, my sternum. The source was obvious, a massive, ancient breaker box on the far wall, a hulking metal cabinet coated in decades of dust. It had a faded stencil on its door, Commonwealth Edison, Series 7. It seemed to throb with a dull, internal energy. Brenda, I started, trying to keep my voice even. That breaker box. The noise is getting worse. It's affecting people. She straightened up slowly, wiping her hands on a rag. Her eyes, usually sharp and impatient, were calm. Too calm. It's an old building, hon, she's got her noises. You just get used to them. She smiled, a serene, empty thing. It's better than the traffic, isn't it? So steady. Helps you tune out the rest of the world. Tune out the rest of the world. The phrase echoed Mr. Henderson's sentiment. It wasn't a bug, it was a feature. They weren't being bothered by the hum, they were being harmonized by it. I was the one creating static. That night, I took my professional recording gear to the basement. I set up my condenser microphone, ran the cable to my laptop, and hit record. I watched the waveform bloom on the screen. It wasn't the simple, rolling sine wave of a standard electrical hum. It was jagged, complex, filled with microvariations. It looked less like a power frequency and more like a voice speaking an alien language. I sat there for an hour, recording, feeling like a spy in a foreign land. My investigation needed a new vector. If the present was incomprehensible, maybe the past held a clue. This led me to the secondary mystery, the subplot that felt like a lifeline. I started digging into the building's history online, cross-referencing property records and old newspaper archives. I found what I was looking for in a digitized tenant ledger from a decade ago. Apartment 4B. My apartment. The previous tenant listed before me was a woman who had lived here for 15 years. But the one before her was different. Finch, Arthur. Tenancy, 18 months. Terminated. Reason for leaving, lease break, forfeiture of deposit. An 18-month tenancy with a broken lease was a red flag in a rent-controlled building this desirable. I dug deeper, searching his name. I found a single hit on an obscure audio engineering forum from 8 years ago. The post was titled, "Seeking Advice on Extreme Low-Frequency Intrusion." The post read, "I live in an old building in the South Loop. For the past year, I've been experiencing a persistent ELF, extremely low frequency, hum. It's not in my gear. It seems to be ambient. It's affecting my sleep, my concentration. My neighbors don't seem to notice, or if they do, they seem to like it. Has anyone ever encountered a signal that seems to tune itself to its environment? It feels architectural. It feels intelligent. I know how this sounds. I'm moving out. My breath hitched. It feels intelligent. Arthur Finch was my ghost, my predecessor in this haunted space. Finding him became my obsession. It took another week of expensive background checks and social media spelunking, but I found him. He was living in Naperville, a suburb so quiet and planned it seemed like an allergic reaction to the chaos of Chicago. My attempts to contact him were met with silence. Emails went unanswered. A registered letter was returned, unopened. He didn't want to be found. Meanwhile, the hum was escalating its campaign against me. It was no longer just a background noise. It was an active presence. If I put on my noise-canceling headphones, the frequency would subtly shift, dropping into a sub-bass register that the headphones couldn't block, a vibration that tickled the bones behind my ears. It was testing my defenses. Probing. One night, I was woken by a rhythmic tapping. Tap. 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 It was coming from the radiator pipe in my bedroom. I got out of bed and pressed my ear to the cold metal. The tapping was traveling through the building's entire system, a steady, patient Morse code. And from the apartments around me, I could hear the faint, synchronized sounds of movement. A drawer opening. A glass being set on a nightstand. A throat being cleared. All in time with the taps. They were communicating. Or something was communicating through them. I stumbled back to my bed, my own internal E-flat screaming a high, thin note of pure terror. I was the only one awake, the only one hearing the code and not understanding the message. I was no longer just isolated. I was the enemy. The anomaly. The last pocket of resistance in a world that had quietly, calmly, surrendered to the hum. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. Desperation is a key that unlocks doors you never meant to open. Arthur Finch wouldn't answer my calls, so I drove to Naperville. His house was a modern suburban box on a street of identical boxes, but with one key difference: the windows were thick, triple-paned, the kind you see on recording studios. The front door looked heavy, solid, sealed. I rang the bell, my heart a frantic drum against the encroaching suburban silence. For a long moment, nothing. Then the door opened a crack, held by a thick brass chain. A pair of terrified eyes peered out. He was older than I expected, his hair gray and his face etched with a permanent, hunted expression. "Arthur Finch?" I asked, holding up a printed copy of his old forum post. He flinched as if I'd struck him. "Go away. I live in 4B now," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "The hum. I hear it. It's organizing them." The chain slid back. The door opened. "Get in," he hissed, pulling me inside. The interior of his house was an acoustic fortress. The walls were covered in thick, gray foam and heavy drapes. The silence was absolute, a crushing, dead void that made my tinnitus feel like a gunshot. It was the sound of a man trying to build a world with no resonance. He made tea with shaking hands, sitting across from me in a sparsely furnished living room. "You shouldn't have come," he said, not looking at me. "It might have followed you." "What is it?" I asked, my voice a whisper in the dead air. I don't know, he said. Not really. I called it, the chord. Because that's what it wants. For everyone to be one note. One perfect, stable, unending chord. He finally met my eyes, and I saw a terror that mirrored my own. It's not a sound, not really. It's a field. A resonance. The old breaker box in the basement, the Series 7, it's not just a power conduit. It's an antenna. Or a heart. It listens. It learns you. It finds the frequency of your anxieties, your thoughts, your biological rhythms, and it starts to tune you. Tune you. It offers a trade, he said, his voice dropping lower. It takes away the noise. The chaos of being an individual. The anxiety, the ambition, the fear. It smooths it all out. In return, you just have to listen. You just have to join the song. He shuddered. I fought it. 4 months. It felt like my own mind was betraying me. I'd have these moments of perfect, blissful peace, and I'd realize I'd been standing in the kitchen for 10 minutes, just listening to the refrigerator hum. It felt good. That's the horror of it. It feels good. Fleeing was his only solution. He'd packed a bag in the middle of the night and driven until the feeling of being watched by the hum had faded, somewhere past the state line. He'd come back a week later, sold everything, and built this silent tomb. It's a contagion of consciousness, he whispered. And you're immune, somehow. Like me. We're the wrong note. And the conductor hates a wrong note. His words confirmed my deepest fears, but they also gave them a name, a shape. When I returned to my apartment that evening, the hum felt different. It was no longer a mysterious force, it was a predator. And it knew I'd been consorting with another resistor. The escalation was immediate and personal. The hum began to weaponize my own sensitivities against me. It started to mimic my tinnitus. The low thrum would be pierced by a high, pure E-flat, a perfect imitation of the note in my head. It was a mocking gesture, an auditory invasion of my most private suffering. It was telling me, I am inside you, too. There is no escape. The behavior of my neighbors grew more overtly strange. They were no longer just synchronized, they were coordinated. One evening, I peered through my peephole and saw a line of them, Mr. Henderson, Jianli, Mrs. Gable from upstairs, standing in the hallway. They weren't facing the walls anymore. They were all facing my door. They stood for a full hour, motionless, their heads cocked in that familiar listening pose. They weren't threatening me physically, but it was a siege nonetheless. A silent, psychological siege. They were waiting for me to fall into tune. My work became impossible. Every sound I tried to edit was polluted by the hum, either the real one or the phantom one it had created in my mind. I started making mistakes, missing deadlines. My carefully ordered life was fraying at the seams. Then came the discovery that shifted everything. I was analyzing the long recording I'd made in the basement, filtering it through a spectrogram, a visual representation of sound frequencies. The complex, voice-like waveform was there, but as I zoomed in, I saw something else. There wasn't just one dominant frequency. There were dozens, hundreds, all layered on top of each other in a dense, intricate tapestry of sound. On a hunch, I took my recorder and discreetly taped Mr. Henderson humming to himself in the laundry room. Then I caught Jianli on the stairs, a low, focused tone in his throat. I even recorded the mailman. I fed each recording into the spectrogram and overlaid them with the master recording from the basement. My breath caught in my throat. Each person's hum was a unique frequency. Mr. Henderson's was a warm, tremulous 52 Hz, Jian's was a sharp, steady 75 Hz. The mailman, a reedy 88 Hz. They were all individual notes. And the master hum from the breaker box wasn't a single sound, it was the sum of all of them. It was a choir. But the most terrifying discovery came when I recorded the silence of my own apartment and analyzed it. There, buried deep beneath the noise floor, was a frequency that matched no one else's. A wavering, uncertain signal around 110 Hz, intertwined with the sharp spike of my E-flat tinnitus. The hum wasn't just broadcasting. It was listening. It had found my frequency. It had assigned me a note. All I had to do was sing it. One afternoon, I tried to make a final, desperate connection. I saw Mr. Henderson watering his single, sad-looking plant in the lobby. I approached him, holding out my phone, on which I'd queued up a Glenn Miller tune he'd once told me he and his late wife used to dance to. "Mr. Henderson," I said gently. "Do you remember this?" I played the first few bars of Moonlight Serenade. For a glorious, heartbreaking second, something flickered in his eyes. A light. A memory. Confusion. "Martha," he whispered. Then, the building itself seemed to answer. The hum, which had been a low, ambient thrum, suddenly dropped in pitch and surged in volume. It was a guttural, possessive growl that vibrated through the soles of my shoes. The light in Mr. Henderson's eyes extinguished instantly. He turned from me, his expression smoothing back into that placid mask, and began to methodically pluck the leaves from his plant, one by one, in a slow, steady rhythm. He didn't look at me again. He was gone. I hadn't just failed to save him, I had triggered a corrective action. I had annoyed the conductor, and the orchestra had responded. My status had been upgraded from resistor to threat. I ran back to my apartment, the sound of my own frantic heartbeat a drum solo against the building's monolithic chord. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. The siege on apartment 4B became relentless. The hum was a constant, probing intelligence. It found the resonant frequency of my window panes, making them shudder softly. It vibrated the water in the toilet bowl into concentric, mesmerizing rings. It turned my home into a tuning fork, and I was the dissonance it was trying to eliminate. Sleep was a luxury I could no longer afford. Every time I drifted off, a perfectly timed floorboard creak or a sharp tap on the pipes would jolt me awake. The chord was tireless. I had two choices, the same two Arthur Finch had faced: flee and live in a silent tomb, forever looking over my shoulder, or surrender and let my note be added to the choir. But my life's work, my entire identity, was built around the manipulation of sound. I was a conductor, too, in my own small way. A third option began to form in my exhausted, buzzing mind. It was insane. It was arrogant. It was all I had left. You don't fight a psalm with silence. You fight it with a different song. I spent 2 days without sleep, fueled by caffeine and terror, hunched over my laptop and audio mixer. I took the master recording from the basement, that complex choir of my neighbor's harmonized souls, and loaded it into my most powerful editing software. I isolated my own frequency, that wavering 110 Hz signal, tangled with my tinnitus. It was weak, discordant, human. And I began to compose. I didn't try to cancel the hum. I tried to hijack it. I created a countermelody, a harmony based not on blissful peace but on my own internal chaos. I took the sharp, painful shriek of my E-flat and wove it into the signal. I layered in the jagged, anxious rhythm of my own heartbeat. I added the sounds of the city that the hum sought to erase, the clatter of the L train, a distant siren, the discordant shout of a street vendor. I built a symphony of noise, of individuality, of flawed and messy life. It was an anthem of resistance. My last will and testament, written in waveform. At 3 a.m., the nadir of the building's quiet, rhythmic breathing, I took my laptop, a portable amplifier, and a single, high-fidelity studio monitor down to the basement. The air was thick and heavy, the hum a physical presence that pushed against my skin. The old Series 7 breaker box seemed to pulse with a faint, internal luminescence. The choir was in full voice. I set up my speaker, pointing it directly at the metal cabinet. My hands were slick with sweat. This was it. My confrontation. Not with fists or words, but with frequencies. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the discordant note in a world of perfect harmony. I hit play. The sound that erupted from my speaker was chaos. It was my anthem of noise, my carefully composed sonic rebellion. For a moment, the two sounds warred in the small, concrete room, the building's deep, unified chord versus my jagged, defiant melody. The effect was instantaneous and violent. The lights in the basement flickered wildly. A low, angry moan came from the breaker box itself, a sound of pure outrage. The hum fractured, shattering into 1,000 dissonant frequencies. Up above, I could hear a muffled cacophony, a chair scraping, a shouted voice, a door slamming. I had introduced chaos into the system. I had made the orchestra forget the sheet music. Then, as my signal played its final, screaming E-flat, something broke. There was a loud crack from the Series 7 cabinet, a smell of ozone and burnt dust, and then silence. Absolute, profound, terrifying silence. The hum was gone. The chord was broken. The presence that had filled every molecule of air in the building for months had vanished. All that remained was the high, thin whine of my own tinnitus. My personal, internal noise. In the crushing void, it sounded louder and more lonely than ever before. I stood there in the dark, my heart hammering, waiting for a sense of triumph that never came. The silence wasn't a victory. It was an amputation. I had killed the building's ghost, and in its place was a profound emptiness that felt infinitely worse. I felt a cosmic loneliness, the chilling realization that I was utterly, completely alone in my own head again. Weeks have passed. I still live in apartment 4B. The building is just a building now. It's noisy again. I can hear Mrs. Gable's TV, Jen Lee's frantic phone calls, the random, unsynchronized creaks and groans of old plumbing. People in the lobby look at each other with the vague, polite annoyance of strangers. Mr. Henderson looks lost, his eyes filled with a quiet confusion, as if he's trying to remember a beautiful dream that has evaporated in the morning light. We are all discordant notes again. We are free. My work has come back. I sit at my desk, my headphones on, cleaning up the noise of other people's worlds. The money is good. My life is back on its precise, controlled schedule. But something is different. My tinnitus, my constant E-flat, is no longer alone. Sometimes, when the city is quiet, I can hear a faint echo behind it. A low, velvety 60-cycle hum. It's not coming from the floorboards or the walls. It's in my ears. It's in my bones. I look out my window at the river of traffic, the pedestrians flowing along the sidewalks. And I start to see it. A subtle grace in their movements. A brief, fleeting moment when all the cars in an intersection seem to turn with the same fluid motion. A crowd of people waiting for a bus, all swaying with the same gentle, hypnotic rhythm. I didn't destroy the chord. I didn't kill the hum. Arthur Finch was wrong. You can't kill a song. My anthem of resistance, my symphony of noise, it didn't serve as an antidote. It was just a new arrangement. A more complex melody. I look at the waveform of my own tinnitus on my screen, and I see it there, woven into the signal, the ghost of the hum. I didn't silence it. I just absorbed it. I became the conductor. And I can't tell if I stopped the quiet contagion in my building, or if I just learned how to broadcast it myself, a new song sung on a much, much wider scale. I put on my headphones, but the hum is still there, harmonizing with my own private noise. The music is inside me now. I am quiet. I am calm. And I listen. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. My life is a structure built of words. Not a house, but a crossword grid. Each day is a clue to be solved, each interaction a definition to be confirmed. I am Arthur Penhaligon, and for 34 years, I have been the senior puzzles editor for the Surrey Chronicle. It is a title of modest but precise dignity. My world is one of synonyms and antonyms, of etymological roots and clever, concise misdirection. It is a world of satisfying clicks as letters fall into place, forming a coherent, interconnected whole. Eleanor used to say I lived in a black and white world. It wasn't a criticism, not from her. She was the color. She was the riot of oils and acrylics in the garden studio, the chaos of pigments on her smock, the unrestrained joy of a perfect sunset. When she died 2 years ago, the color bled from my world, leaving behind the familiar, reassuring grid. I found solace in its logic, its solvable nature. Grief is not a solvable puzzle. There is number 12 across 4, a heart hollowed out. My house in Oxshott is a testament to this ordered existence. The lawn is edged with geometric precision. The books are alphabetized by author. My days follow a rhythm as predictable as a metronome: wake at 6:30, tea and toast with marmalade, the Times crossword until 7:45, then to my study to wrangle the contributions for the Chronicle. Lunch at 1 p.m. sharp. A walk, weather permitting, at 4 o'clock. Dinner, a book, bed. The first tremor in this foundation was so slight I almost missed it. It was a Tuesday. I was reviewing a submission, a rather pedestrian 15 by 15 grid. The clue for 3 down was the color of the summer sky. A 5-letter word. BLUE, simple. Except, the 5th box was empty. The answer provided was sky-y. A lazy, nonsensical variant. I circled it in red ink with more force than was strictly necessary. No, I muttered to the empty room. The word is blue. I wrote it down. BLUE. The word looked strange. Like a foreigner I'd met once at a party, its face familiar but its name stubbornly elusive. Of course I knew the word. It was the color of Eleanor's favorite cornflowers, the shade of the ink in my good fountain pen, the hue of the Wedgwood vase on the mantelpiece. I looked at the vase. It was a deep, rich. It was the color of the vase. The label, the simple, monosyllabic name, felt like a coat that no longer fit the concept. I dismissed it as fatigue. A brain fog, the kind that descends after staring at grids for too long. I finished my work, fixed myself a shepherd's pie from a recipe Eleanor had written on a grease-stained index card, and thought no more of it. The following day, I stopped at Mrs. Gable's corner shop for a bottle of milk and the paper. She was arranging a display of new Scottish shortbread, the tins decorated with a portrait of a Highland piper. "Aren't they lovely, Mr. Penhaligon?" she said, her voice a cheerful chirp. "Such a handsome tin. All that tartan, and the color of his sash." She gestured vaguely, her hand fluttering. I looked at the sash. It was a vibrant, royal shade. "Blue," I supplied, the word feeling thick and awkward in my mouth. Mrs. Gable blinked at me. Not with recognition, but with polite confusion, as if I'd just started speaking in fluent Urdu. "Pardon?" "The color," I clarified, pointing. "It's blue." She tilted her head. "What a peculiar thing to say." "It's just the proper color for it, isn't it? The sky color." Sky color. The second time in 2 days. A coincidence. A local colloquialism I'd somehow never noticed. Yet, a chill, like a sliver of ice, worked its way down my spine. Mrs. Gable had known me for 20 years. She knew I wasn't one for peculiar sayings. But she looked at me as if I were the anomaly, a glitch in her placid, well-stocked world. I paid for my milk and left, the shop bell tinkling my retreat. On my walk home, I made a point of noticing things. The cerulean door of number 12. The navy-colored recycling bins awaiting collection. The faded indigo of a child's forgotten kite snagged in the branches of an oak tree. I could see them, catalog them, compare their shades. I could describe them with a poet's flourish if I wished. I could call them azure, sapphire, cobalt, teal. But the simple, foundational word, the one a child learns in its cradle, felt like a phantom limb. A ghost on the tongue. That Thursday, at my weekly pint with David Cartwright at the Griffin, I decided to conduct a small experiment. David was a retired actuary, a man who, like me, appreciated facts and figures. Remarkable sky today, I began, steering the conversation. A perfect, cloudless blue. David took a long swallow of his bitter. That it is, Arthur. Good weather for the garden. He didn't flinch at the word. A wave of relief washed over me. It was just me. My tired, grieving brain playing tricks. I've always thought, I pressed on, unable to leave it, that it's the most definitive of colors. So simple. Blue. He put his glass down and gave me an odd look, the one he usually reserved for when I explained the intricacies of an anagrammatic clue. You're in a funny mood today, Arthur. It's the sky. What else would you call it? It's sky-colored. The relief evaporated, replaced by a cold, heavy certainty. He hadn't registered the word. It had passed through his hearing and left no impression, like a stone dropping into a bottomless well. He had heard the sentence, understood my meaning from context, but the specific noun had simply failed to land. But if you had to give it a name? I insisted, feeling a frantic edge to my voice. A name? Why would it need a name? It's the color of the sky, Arthur. Are you feeling all right? You look a bit pale. I was the only one. I was standing on a precipice, and the solid ground of shared language was crumbling away beneath my feet. I finished my pint in silence, the cheerful pub chatter sounding distant and distorted, as if broadcast from a fading station. When I got home, I opened a new, pristine notebook. On the first page, I wrote. Project Anomia. Phase 1. Subject, the word blue. Status, missing, presumed lost. Underneath, I listed the dates, the encounters with Mrs. Gable and David. I described the blankness in their eyes. The quiet, uncomprehending dismissal. It was not a hostile reaction. It was far more terrifying than that. It was the placid certainty of an entire world that I, not it, was the one who was wrong. My tidy grid was beginning to look like a map of an alien world, and the language I had mastered was no longer the native tongue. I was becoming a foreigner in my own home. The next few weeks passed in a state of hypervigilance. I was an anthropologist in a familiar but suddenly strange land. The absence of blue was consistent, absolute. People described the sea as watercolored. They complimented new parents on their babies' lovely eye color. My pen, my vase, my recycling bin, they were all defined by their function or their relationship to other objects, not by their intrinsic chromatic quality. The word had been surgically removed from the collective consciousness, and no one but me seemed to notice the scar. I started to rationalize. A localized psychological phenomenon. Some bizarre after effect of a news story I'd missed, or a viral internet trend that had seeped into the real world. But that didn't fit the quiet, unconscious nature of the forgetting. No one seemed to be avoiding the word, they simply didn't have it. It was a file deleted from the system. My work became both a torment and a refuge. I found myself obsessively crafting clues that hinged on the missing word, a secret, desperate test for my unseen readers. 7 down, a melancholy style of music, 5. I waited for letters to the editor, for complaints, for anyone to point out the obvious answer. None came. The winning entry for that week's puzzle prize had filled it in with soul. It fit, but it was wrong. It was a circumvention. The world was learning to walk around the holes. Then, the second hole appeared. It happened on a Sunday evening. I was preparing my schedule for the week ahead, a ritual that anchored me. I wrote Monday, review quarterly submissions. And just like before, the word looked alien. Monday. It felt like a misremembered password, close but not quite right. A faint sense of panic, prickly and hot, rose in my chest. The next morning, I called the Chronicle office. "Arthur," chirped the receptionist, "Brenda. Calling early today." "Yes, Brenda. I just wanted to confirm the deadline for the holiday supplement. Is it this Monday?" A pause. Not of thought, but of non-comprehension. "Sorry, Arthur, what?" "Monday," I repeated, enunciating clearly. "The day. Today." "Oh, you mean first day," she laughed, a breezy, tinkling sound. "Silly me. Yes, the deadline is 5 o'clock today. On first day." My blood ran cold. First day. Where had that come from? It wasn't a word. It was a descriptor, a placeholder. But she had said it with such casual certainty. I mumbled my thanks and hung up, my hand trembling. I looked at my calendar. The neat, printed letters spelling Monday seemed to mock me. They were fossils, remnants of a forgotten language. I opened my notebook, my sanctuary of reason. Second subject, the word Monday. Status, replaced by first day. This was different. This was worse. A void was one thing. A void that was being actively, unconsciously filled was another. It suggested an intelligence, a process. The quiet contagion was evolving. That week, I found myself adrift in a new calendar. Tuesday became second day, Wednesday midday, and so on. People adapted with a seamless, terrifying ease. Schedules were rearranged, appointments confirmed, all using this new, blandly logical nomenclature. I tried, once more, to push back. "I'll have the proofs ready for you by Tuesday," I told my junior editor, a young man named Colin. "You mean second day?" he corrected, gently, as if I were a senile uncle who'd gotten confused. "Of course, Arthur. No rush." He was trying to be kind. That was the most maddening part. Their reality was so solid, so unshakable, that my adherence to the old words was seen as a charming eccentricity, a sign of age, a harmless slip of the tongue. I was being gaslighted by the entire population of Surrey. The isolation was no longer a feeling, it was a physical state. I was an island, and the sea level of a shared reality was rising around me, threatening to drown me in its quiet, placid tide. Phase 2, Growing Awareness and Isolation. My journal, Project Anomia, became my only confidant. Its pages filled with my spidery script, a frantic catalogue of the encroaching silence. The world was losing its texture, its specificity. The forgotten words were like threads being pulled from a tapestry, leaving behind patches of gray, featureless canvas. After Blue and Monday, the contagion accelerated. The next to go was music. I realized it when I turned on the radio, hoping for the comfort of a Brahms symphony. What came out of the speakers was a sequence of organized, melodic sounds, beautiful and complex, but the announcer's description was chilling. And that was a lovely piece of organized sound from the London Philharmonic. He stumbled, corrected himself. A wonderful performance of that famous, emotional arrangement. The word itself, music, had evaporated. People still listened to it, hummed it, tapped their feet to it. But they could no longer name it. They called it patterned air, rhythm work, or, most commonly, the listening thing. At the Griffin, the jukebox was still playing, but the conversations around it had changed. "Put on that good, you know, that loud feeling from the 60s, a man slurred, pointing. His friend nodded. "Ah, the one with the guitars. Good choice." I tried to talk to David about it. It's strange, isn't it? How we talk about, well, songs. We don't seem to have a word for it anymore. David frowned into his pint. "What are you talking about, Arthur? We've always called it the listening thing. What else would you call it? Don't be dense." His irritation was a wall. My attempts to breach it were met with a new kind of denial, not just confusion, but a flicker of hostility. My questions were unwelcome static, disturbing their new, simplified frequency. I was the one making things complicated. I was the one who was wrong. My isolation was now a fortress, and I was its sole prisoner. I stopped trying to talk to people about it. My questions only made the void more apparent, made them more certain of my strangeness. I began to feel a gnawing paranoia. Was I the only one? Truly. Across the whole country. The whole world. I spent hours online, delving into obscure forums, searching for phrases like, people forgetting words, or, loss of concepts. I found plenty of articles on aphasia and dementia, but nothing on a collective scale. I found conspiracy theories about mind control satellites and chemical agents in the water supply, but they felt too loud, too clumsy for the quiet subtlety of what was happening. This wasn't a conspiracy, it felt more like erosion. A natural process, as unstoppable and impersonal as the tide. This is when I turned to Eleanor's things. I hadn't dared to touch her studio since she passed. It was her sanctuary, and to disturb it felt like a desecration. But now, driven by a desperation that overrode my grief, I unlocked the door. The air inside was still, thick with the scent of turpentine, linseed oil, and her faint, lingering perfume. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light from the skylight. Canvases were stacked against the wall, some finished, some abandoned. Her easel stood in the center of the room, holding a half-finished painting of the garden, the cornflowers a vibrant, defiant sky color. I ran my hand over the rough canvas, a fresh wave of loss washing over me. Eleanor hadn't just seen color, she had felt it. She talked about colors having temperatures, personalities, sounds. My world was black and white, hers was a symphony. And perhaps, I thought, she had heard the silence coming. I started going through her journals. Not diaries of daily events, but notebooks filled with sketches, color swatches, and fragmented thoughts. Most of it was standard artist fare, notes on composition, frustrations with a particular pigment. But then I found a series of entries from the last year of her life that made my breath catch. October 12th. The names for things feel thin today. I tried to paint the delphiniums, but the word blue feels like a worn-out coat. The color is so much bigger than the name. The name is failing. It's like trying to catch the sea in a thimble. October 19th. Had a funny turn at the market. A man was selling lapis lazuli. A beautiful stone. But for a moment, the name for its color, was just, gone. A hole in my head. I could only point. A silent transaction. He seemed to understand. November 3rd. The world is made of agreements. We agree that the sky is blue. We agree that the sound from a violin is music. We agree a week begins on Monday. These are just anchor words. What happens when the ropes begin to fray? Does the thing itself drift away? Or does it just wait for a new anchor? I sat on her dusty stool, my heart hammering against my ribs. She had seen it. She had felt the beginning of the fraying. Was her sensitivity as an artist a kind of early warning system? Was her illness a symptom of this conceptual decay, her mind unable to cope with a reality that was losing its definitions? The thought was monstrous, a new layer of guilt and horror to add to my grief. Had I dismissed her fears as artistic temperament, as part of the illness that was already taking her? My research had given me a clue, but it had also deepened my paranoia. It wasn't just me. Eleanor had known. But she was gone. I was alone again, but now with the chilling knowledge that I wasn't the first to notice. And then the twist came. The thing that shattered my understanding of my role in this quiet contagion. I was not just an observer. I was not just a victim. I was cleaning my study, a desperate attempt to impose order on a world that had lost its own. I was sorting through a stack of old crossword drafts when a small, torn slip of paper fell out from between the pages. It was from a notepad I kept by my telephone, the paper cheap and thin. On it, in my own distinctively neat, slightly spidery handwriting, were 2 words, connected by an arrow. Sky-color glimmerfall. I stared at it. My own handwriting. Unmistakable. The curve of the G, the precise loop of the F. But I had no memory of writing it. None. The word glimmerfall was utterly alien to me. It sounded like something from a fantasy novel, whimsical and strange. I would never invent such a word. I was a man of roots and definitions, not of fanciful coinages. I tried to rationalize. Had I written it in my sleep? A doodle? A fragment of a dream I'd forgotten? I tried to throw the paper away, but my hand wouldn't obey. I tucked it into the front of my anomia journal, a piece of evidence I didn't understand. A week later, I was in the local library, pretending to read the newspaper. 2 teenagers were sitting at a nearby table, whispering about a film they'd seen. The special effects were amazing, one said. Especially that bit on the alien planet, with the double suns and the weird, the glimmerfall sky. The book I was holding slipped from my fingers and hit the floor with a loud thud. The teenagers looked over, annoyed. I didn't notice. The word. She had used the word. Glimmerfall. The word I had written. The word I didn't remember writing. She had said it with the same casual, unthinking confidence that people now used for first day. It was a real word to her. A frantic search of my study unearthed more of them. Tucked into books, used as bookmarks, scribbled in the margins of old newspapers. The listening thing still song. First day sun return. Each one, written in my hand. Each one, a word I had never consciously conceived. They were replacements. New anchors. And I was the one writing them. The horror of this discovery was profound. I was no longer a passive chronicler of the decay, I was an active, albeit unconscious, participant in the change. Was I the source of the contagion? Was my obsession with words somehow causing this, my mind broadcasting these new terms into the ether? Or was I merely a conduit? A scribe for some vast, unknowable force that was rewriting reality, using my hand, my knowledge of linguistic structure, as its pen? The isolation I had felt before was nothing compared to this. Before, I was the last sane man. Now, I was a monster, a vector, the patient zero of a plague that was erasing the world I knew and replacing it with something else. Something of my own unwitting creation. I looked at my own hands, at the fingers that held the pen, as if they belonged to a stranger. They were instruments of a change I could not control or comprehend. The grid of my life was not just being filled with wrong answers anymore. The grid itself was being erased and redrawn, and the pen was in my own hand. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. The discovery of the replacement words changed everything. My journal entries became more frantic, a desperate investigation into myself. I conducted experiments. I would think of a fading concept, like river, and focus on it, trying to see if I could consciously create a new word. Nothing happened. The process was not under my control. The words only appeared when I wasn't looking, scrawled on scraps of paper as if by a phantom hand. River, flow, road. Laugh, joy, sound. Yesterday, day before. They were always simple, often compound words, like the kennings of Old English poetry. They were logical, descriptive, but lacked the resonant history of the words they were replacing. They were flat-packed vocabulary for a flattening world. And they were spreading. I started hearing them everywhere. In the shops, on the bus, from the mouth of the postman. Careful by the flow road, Mr. Penhaligon, the bank is slippery. My little granddaughter has the most wonderful joy sound. The new language was taking root, seated by my unconscious hand. The world was healing around the voids, using the lexical graphs I provided. Eleanor's journals became my guide. The world is made of agreements. What happens when the ropes begin to fray? I began to form a terrifying theory. This wasn't a disease or a conspiracy. It was a fundamental process. A kind of linguistic entropy. The collective psychic energy that held a word to its meaning was finite. Over centuries of use, of repetition, of being taken for granted, a word could simply wear out. Become thin, as Eleanor had put it. It would lose its anchoring power, and the concept would drift, unnamed, in the collective mind. The gray word of my private fears wasn't a word at all. It was the color of the void left behind. A silence. And that silence, apparently, was intolerable to the universe. Reality required labels. It needed a handle to be grasped. When an old one wore away, a new one had to be forged. And for reasons I couldn't fathom, the forge was me. My life, steeped in the architecture of language, had made me a perfect conduit. I was a lightning rod for linguistic necessity. This new understanding did not bring comfort. It was the difference between thinking you have a fever and discovering you are a living volcano. The stakes escalated with this awful knowledge. The decay was accelerating. The words that vanished were no longer just simple nouns or colors, they were becoming more complex, more integral. One afternoon, the word book began to fade. I was in my study, surrounded by them. My oldest friends. My most loyal companions. I picked up a worn copy of Middlemarch. It was a heavy object, full of paper and print, but the word for what it was had become slippery, elusive. I went to the library, a place that was now a museum of fading concepts. The librarian, a stern woman named Ms. Albright, was helping a student. "I'm looking for the written story holder, about the French Revolution," the student said, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Ah, yes," Ms. Albright replied, without missing a beat. "The text blocks are in the history section. Follow me." Text blocks. My heart sank. I hurried back to my study, a cold dread washing over me. I sat at my desk, my hands hovering over a piece of paper, half hoping, half fearing that the replacement would appear. Nothing. The void remained. For 2 days, the world struggled with circumlocutions. Story containers, paged objects, word bricks. The system was failing to find a new anchor. The consequences were subtle but deeply unnerving. People seemed to lose interest in reading. The library was emptier than I'd ever seen it. At the Chronicle, no one bothered with the style guide anymore. The very idea of a reference text seemed to be losing its meaning. Without a simple, solid word for the object itself was losing its place in the world. Its conceptual gravity was weakening. This was the new threat. If I, the scribe, failed to provide a new word, the concept itself might not just become nameless, it might wither away entirely. The fabric of reality wouldn't just be patched, it would develop permanent holes. It was during this crisis that I thought I had found an ally. My search for others who could see the change had been fruitless. But one evening, at the Griffin, David Cartwright leaned over and whispered, his voice low and urgent. "Arthur. Can I have a word? A private one." My pulse quickened. We stepped outside into the cool evening air. "You've been acting strangely for months," he began. "Asking about colors. About the days of the week. I thought you were going crackers. And now?" I asked, barely breathing. "And now I can't remember the name for what we're drinking," he said, holding up his pint glass. The word beer had started to go hazy that afternoon. "I know it's made from hops and barley. I know how it tastes. But the name is gone. And everyone is pretending it's normal. But you're not. You see it too, don't you?" The relief was so immense I felt dizzy. "Yes," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Yes, David. I see it. For a week, I had a co-conspirator. We met daily, comparing notes. He hadn't experienced the scribe effect, but he was a second witness. He validated my sanity. He remembered Blue Monday music. We were two men on a lifeboat. He became obsessed with finding a pattern, a cause. He was an actuary, after all. He started creating charts, mapping the decay. He theorized it was linked to a new mobile phone mast erected near the town. It was a plausible, comforting, human-sized explanation. "It's radiation, Arthur," he said, his eyes gleaming with certainty. "Microwaves, frying the linguistic centers of our brains. But some of us are more resistant. You and me. We have to prove it." His theory was a lifeline, and I clung to it. It meant I wasn't a cog in some cosmic machine, I was just a man with a radiation-resistant brain. But even as he spoke, I knew he was wrong. It didn't explain Eleanor, years ago. It didn't explain the replacement words. The test of our alliance came when the word beer was finally replaced. I found the scrap of paper on my kitchen counter. Fermented grain drink gold draft. I didn't tell David. The next evening, at the pub, he was grim-faced. "Still nothing," he muttered. "It's getting worse. People are just pointing and grunting." Just then, the barman came over. "Another gold draft for you, Mr. Cartwright." David stared at him. "What did you call it?" "A gold draft," the barman repeated, confused. "Same as always." David looked at me, his face pale. "Did you hear that?" I nodded slowly. "Yes." "Where did that come from?" he demanded, his eyes wide with a new kind of fear. It's adapting. The signal is changing." He didn't see the truth. He couldn't. His mind had built a fortress of logic around the phenomenon, and he couldn't see beyond its walls. I had a choice. I could show him the scrap of paper. I could tell him about my role. I could share the terrifying burden. But as I looked at his panicked face, I saw the fragility of his sanity. My truth would shatter him. My reality was not a lifeboat, it was a maelstrom. To pull him in would be to drown him. My isolation, I realized, was also a form of quarantine. "It's just a new name they've made up, David," I said, the lie tasting like ash. "A slang term." He stared at me, his eyes searching my face. He saw my evasion. He saw that I knew more than I was telling. The trust between us evaporated in that moment. Replaced by suspicion. He thought I was part of it. He stood up, knocking his chair slightly. "I need to go," he said, his voice cold. "I need to think." He walked away without another word. I had not lost an ally. I had created a new threat. A man who knew I was different, but who had drawn all the wrong conclusions. My isolation was complete once more, and more dangerous than ever. The volcano was rumbling, and now someone else had seen the smoke. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. David became my shadow. I'd see him across the street, watching my house. He left pamphlets on my doorstep about the dangers of electromagnetic radiation. He tried to talk to Mrs. Gable about me, but his frantic warnings about my condition only made him seem unhinged in this new, placid world. He was fighting the last war, unable to see that the nature of the conflict had changed. His paranoia was a small, sharp danger in a world consumed by a much larger, quieter one. But the true confrontation was not with David. It was with the process itself, and it came for the word that I held most sacred. It began subtly, as always. I was looking at the photograph of Eleanor I kept on my desk. Her smile, the light in her eyes. I whispered her name. Eleanor. The word felt thin. The edges were fraying. The anchor was slipping. Over the next few days, the decay became undeniable. When I tried to think of her, her name would recede, leaving me with only the feeling, the memory of her presence. It was the most profound agony I had ever known. To lose her once was tragedy. To have her name, the very sound that defined her for me, eroded away was a violation beyond bearing. This, I knew, was a line I could not allow to be crossed. This was not Blue or Monday. This was the cornerstone of my entire being. I would not let her dissolve into the gray void. I would not let her become my deceased spouse figure or the woman I was married to. The panic was a physical thing, a tightening in my chest that made it hard to breathe. I sat in my study for hours, staring at her photograph, repeating her name like an incantation, trying to pour all my will, all my memory, into the 5 syllables, to make them solid again. Eleanor. But the word grew more hollow with each repetition. I realized I was facing a terrible choice. I could fight it. I could refuse to be the scribe. I could withhold the replacement word and let her name fade into nothing, hoping that my silent rebellion might somehow stop the process. But the episode with the word book had shown me what happened when a void was left unfilled. The concept itself began to wither. To let her name die would be to risk letting the memory, the very essence of her, follow suit. Or I could surrender. I could accept my horrifying role and provide the new anchor. It felt like a betrayal. It felt like replacing her. But was it better to have a new name for the memory than to have no name at all? The confrontation wasn't in the street or with another person. It was here, in the silence of my study, with a pen, a piece of paper, and the ghost of my wife. My hands trembled. This time, it would not be an unconscious act. This time, I had to be a willing participant. I had to take control of the involuntary, to make a conscious choice in the heart of the madness. I picked up my fountain pen, the one with the sky-colored ink. I looked at her photograph. I didn't think about her name. I thought about what she was. The color in my black and white world. The solution to a clue I never knew I was missing. The force that held my own small, chaotic universe together. She was not just a memory. She was a constant, a fixed point. My hand moved across the paper. The writing was still mine, but the impulse felt as if it came from somewhere else, from a place of deep, structural necessity. It was not a word of whimsy or fancy. It was a word of definition. Eleanor Heart Anchor. I stared at the 2 words. A wave of profound, soul-shaking grief and a strange, terrifying peace washed over me. I had not replaced her. I had defined her essence. I had taken the most important part of my reality and forged a new anchor to hold it fast against the entropic tide. I had committed the ultimate act of preservation through the ultimate act of change. In that moment, I understood. I was not the source of the contagion, nor merely its victim. I was part of the cure. A terrible, lonely, necessary cure. The universe was not malevolent, it was merely mending itself, and I was its needle and thread. The world outside my window the next morning looked the same, but it was not. The sky was a deep, calming glimmerfall. The birds sang a complex, beautiful still song. These words were no longer alien to me. They were mine. Not by creation, but by transcription. I was the keeper of the new dictionary, the silent lexicographer of a changing world. David Cartwright eventually moved away. He couldn't bear to live in a town that refused to acknowledge the danger he saw. I see him sometimes, in my mind's eye, a lonely warrior tilting at windmills, unaware that the world had not been conquered, but had simply molted, shedding an old skin for a new one. My life now has a new routine. My work at the Chronicle continues, a strange echo of a former reality. But my real work begins when the house is quiet. I sit at my desk, my anomia journal open beside me. It is no longer a log of what has been lost, but a glossary of what is becoming. The fading comes more frequently now. Friend. Hope. Home. Love. Each one is a small death, a fresh pang of loss for the world that was. And each time, I feel the familiar, terrifying peace descend. I take up my pen, I look past the word to the truth of the thing itself, and I write. I am not a widower. I am not an editor. I am a scribe. I listen to the silence, and I give it a name. The list is long, and it is growing. And the world, word by quiet word, is becoming mine. The quiet contagion. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. The severance package was a neat, clinical document. It spoke of restructuring and synergistic realignment, corporate euphemisms for the fact that my job, analyzing logistics data for a mid-size shipping firm, could now be done better and cheaper by a piece of software. I was 34, and for the first time since university, I had no schedule. My days, once partitioned by meetings, deadlines, and the comforting rhythm of the GO train into Toronto, had collapsed into a formless, yawning expanse. My apartment in Oakbridge, a sprawling suburb that prided itself on its quiet streets and plentiful parks, began to feel less like a home and more like a holding cell. The silence was the worst part. It wasn't peaceful, it was accusatory. It highlighted the absence of keyboard clicks, the lack of a ringing phone, the void where my purpose used to be. To combat the encroaching lethargy, I decided to build a new routine. It was a pale imitation of my old life, a flimsy scaffold against the threat of daytime television and existential dread. Mondays were for job applications, a soul-crushing exercise in tailoring my resume for algorithms that would likely discard it anyway. Wednesdays were for the gym. Fridays were for household chores. And Tuesdays at 10:15 a.m., were for groceries. I chose the Valomart on Mapleview Road. It was big, impersonal, and smelled faintly of disinfectant and rotisserie chicken. It was the perfect place to feel anonymous. The fluorescent lights hummed a constant, monotonous E-flat, a sound I found strangely calming. The shopping carts all had one squeaky wheel, a universal constant. It was, in its own way, a stable data point in a life that had become chaotic. The first time, I didn't notice. It was just a grocery run. I filled my cart with the bachelor's essentials, eggs, bread, milk, a sad-looking block of old cheddar, and too many President's Choice frozen pizzas. I was just another ghost haunting the aisles. The second Tuesday, a week later, I felt a flicker. A spark of déjà vu in the produce section. A middle-aged woman in a bright red pea coat, her hair in a tight bun, was meticulously inspecting avocados, her expression one of intense concentration. I was sure I had seen her do the exact same thing, in the exact same spot, last week. People have habits, I told myself, grabbing a bag of onions. Near the deli counter. A man with a neatly trimmed beard and wire-rimmed glasses was arranging 6 cans of flaked light tuna in a perfect pyramid in his cart. Again, a tickle of familiarity. He likes tuna. So what? I was stressed. My brain, starved of the complex patterns it was built to analyze, was latching onto meaningless coincidences. I paid for my items and forgot about it. It was the third Tuesday that the unease began to curdle into genuine anxiety. I arrived at precisely 10:15 a.m., a creature of my own manufactured habit. I grabbed a cart, the front left wheel squeaked, of course, and walked in. There she was. Red peacoat woman, by the avocados. Her gloved hand hovered over them with the exact same pensive hesitation. I slowed my pace, my heart starting a low, nervous thrum. I moved towards the canned goods aisle. And there he was. Tuna can man, placing his 5th can onto the pyramid in his cart. His movements were fluid, economical, and identical to the memory I had of him. My breath hitched. This wasn't coincidence. This was a pattern. My old professional instincts kicked in, pushing past the surface-level disbelief. I abandoned my own shopping list and became an observer. I drifted through the aisles, a ghost with a new purpose. In the frozen section, a lanky teenager with bright green headphones and a distinctive crack across his phone screen stared into a freezer of ice cream, unmoving. I recognized him. Last week, he had been there, a statue of adolescent indecision. In the bakery, a young mother was patiently explaining to her toddler, strapped into the cart's child seat, why they couldn't get the donut with the blue sprinkles. The toddler's whine was the same pitch, the same duration. The mother's placating sigh seemed to have the exact same acoustic property. It was a tableau vivant. A perfect, repeating loop of mundane life. The same dozen or so shoppers, trapped in the amber of this specific Tuesday morning. I felt a cold sweat on my neck. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy. I pretended to be checking a message, but I was taking a picture of the tuna can man and his metallic monument. The photo felt flimsy, inadequate proof. "Can I help you find something, sir?" I jumped, spinning around. A young employee, no older than 19, was stocking shelves with jars of marinara sauce. His name tag read, Kevin. No, I'm fine," I said, my voice too loud. He gave me a polite, vacant smile. "All right. Have a good day." He turned back to his work, placing a jar of Prego on the shelf with a soft, practiced clink. I watched him for a moment. Was he part of it? I couldn't remember seeing him last week. Maybe he was real. Or maybe his loop was just stocking this specific shelf. The uncertainty was nauseating. I fled. I abandoned my cart in the middle of the cereal aisle and walked out, the automatic doors hissing shut behind me like a sigh of relief. In the car, I sat for a long time, the engine off, listening to the frantic drumming of my own pulse. I looked at the photo on my phone. The man, the cart, the cans. It was real. But what was it? A flash mob, practicing for some bizarre piece of performance art? A psychological experiment I'd stumbled into? Was I losing my mind? The layoff, the stress, the isolation, it was the perfect breeding ground for paranoia. That was the most logical explanation. It was easier to believe that my own mind was fracturing than to believe that reality itself had developed a glitch. That night, I opened a new document on my laptop, a spreadsheet. I created columns: time, shopper ID, description, location, observed action. I labeled the file, Valumart Anomaly. It was absurd. It was insane. But it was the only thing I could think of to do. My name is Liam Carter, I used to analyze data, and I had a new, terrifying data set. The following Tuesday, I didn't go in. I couldn't bring myself to. Instead, I parked across the street, my heart pounding, and watched the entrance through a pair of old birdwatching binoculars I found in the back of my closet. 10:08 a.m., red peacoat woman pulls into the lot in a blue Honda Civic. 10:11 a.m., tuna can man arrives on foot from the west. 10:13 a.m. Green headphones teenager gets dropped off by a minivan. They were arriving on schedule. They were real people, with lives outside the store. They were being summoned. I spent the rest of the week in a haze of anxiety. Every normal routine I saw on the street, the same dog walker every morning, the same mail carrier, felt suspect. The world had become a thin veneer, and I was terrified of what would happen if I scratched it. I tried to focus on my job hunt, but the words on the screen swam before my eyes. The only thing that felt real was the spreadsheet, the cold, hard grid where I was charting the edges of my own sanity. I was beginning to feel less like an analyst and more like a man documenting his own descent. Phase 2, growing awareness and isolation. The next Tuesday, I went back. I couldn't not go. The fear was a physical thing, a cold knot in my stomach, but the need to know was stronger. I armed myself with my new ritual, a small notebook and a pen in my jacket pocket, my phone ready. I felt like a spy on a mission of cosmic importance that only I was aware of. 10:15 a.m. The automatic doors hissed open. The E-flat hum of the lights washed over me. The air was thick with the familiar smell of floor cleaner. Everything was in its place. There they were. My cast of characters. Red peacoat woman by the avocados, her brow furrowed in concentration. Tuna can man in aisle 4, beginning his pyramidal construction. I started my patrol, my senses on high alert, documenting not just their positions but the minutiae. The woman with the red coat always picked up 3 avocados, weighing each one in her palm for precisely 5 seconds. The teenager with the green headphones always stood in front of the Ben & Jerry's for 2 minutes and 12 seconds before walking away empty-handed. I timed it. The young mother in the bakery aisle always pointed to the same loaf of sourdough bread when her child, momentarily distracted from the donut, asked what they were getting. These weren't just repeated actions, they were performances, executed with an unnerving precision. Their faces held the same expressions, placid, focused, but fundamentally blank. There was no flicker of improvisation, no spark of genuine, in-the-moment thought. It was like watching a film on a loop, but the film was 3-dimensional and I could walk through it. My isolation deepened. The world outside the Valomart on a Tuesday morning felt loud, chaotic, and blessedly real. But the knowledge of the loop infected everything. It was a secret I couldn't share. I tried once. I called my sister, Sarah. She was a nurse, practical and perpetually tired. Liam. Everything okay? You sound weird. Yeah, fine. Just, a weird question. Have you ever had, like, extreme déjà vu? Seeing the same exact thing happen twice. All the time, she said, her voice muffled as if she were making coffee. It's called being a parent. I see the same bowl of Cheerios get knocked over every single morning. What's up? I took a breath and tried to explain what I was seeing at the Valomart. I chose my words carefully, trying to sound rational, like I was describing a curious sociological phenomenon. I mentioned the woman with the coat, the man with the tuna. There was a long pause on her end. Liam, she said finally, her voice laced with a careful, clinical concern. You've been under a lot of stress. Losing the job, it's a huge blow. Your brain is probably just looking for patterns. It's what you do, right? Maybe you should try going to a different grocery store. Or go on a Wednesday. I did go on a Wednesday. It was normal. See? So just go on Wednesday from now on. Problem solved. Sarah, you're not hearing me. It's not a coincidence. It's wrong. Okay, honey, she said, her tone shifting to the one she used on confused elderly patients. Maybe you should talk to someone. Dr. Evans is really good. Just to have a chat. It might help with the stress. I hung up, a cold wave of despair washing over me. She thought I was cracking up. To her, the options were A massive, reality-defying conspiracy centered on a suburban grocery store, or B, her unemployed brother was having a breakdown. Of course she chose B. I would have chosen B. But I was there. I had seen it. I was utterly, terrifyingly alone in my knowledge. My investigation became my sole purpose. My job applications slowed to a trickle, then stopped. My apartment grew messier. The only thing I maintained was the spreadsheet. It was now a sprawling document with multiple tabs, cross-references, and detailed timelines. I started a secondary investigation, a subplot to my main obsession. I began researching the Valomart itself. The internet offered little. It was built in 1998 on a parcel of land that used to be a farmer's field. No ancient burial grounds, no secret government installations, no history of strange occurrences. It was aggressively, disappointingly normal. I even went to the Oakbridge Municipal Office, feigning interest in local development history, and looked at the original building permits. Everything was in order. The dead end was frustrating. I started looking for other glitches, anything to corroborate my central finding. I fixated on a streetlight outside my apartment window. Sometimes it flickered. I started a new logbook. Streetlight log. I recorded the times, the duration of the flickers, the weather conditions. I was looking for a pattern, a signal in the noise. For 2 weeks, there was nothing. Just random electrical faults. Sarah was right. I was going crazy. I was chasing ghosts in fluorescent lighting and faulty wiring. Then, one Monday night, the night before my next scheduled Valomart visit, the streetlight began to flicker. It wasn't random. It was rhythmic. On. Off. On. Off. On. A pause. On. Off. A longer pause. It was Morse code. I scrambled for a chart online, my hands shaking so badly I could barely type. S. O. S, then it repeated. S, O, S. I stared out the window, my blood running cold. It was a distress signal. And it was coming from a mundane piece of municipal infrastructure. The anomaly wasn't confined to the store. The store was just a symptom. The sickness was spreading. My paranoia bloomed. Was someone watching me? Did they, whoever they were, know that I knew? Was the streetlight a warning? Or was it something else? A cry for help from another observer, someone else trapped on the outside looking in? The next day, I entered the Valomart not just as an observer, but as a man who suspected he was a player in a game whose rules he was only beginning to glimpse. The familiar scene unfolded, but my perception of it had changed. The placid expressions of the shoppers no longer looked blank, they looked erased. The quiet efficiency of their movements no longer seemed practiced, it seemed programmed. I decided to push the boundary. To introduce a new variable into the system. I walked to aisle 4. Tuna Can Man was there, his back to me, reaching for his 4th can. My heart hammered against my ribs. I took a deep breath, stepped forward, and gently took a can of chunk-light tuna, the kind packed in water, not oil, from the shelf and placed it in his cart, right beside his pyramid of flaked light tuna packed in oil. He didn't notice. He picked up his own can, turned, and placed it on his stack. Then he froze. It was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at the can. His entire body just stopped. Mid-motion. His hand hovered over his cart. For a full 3 seconds, he was a statue. I could hear the hum of the freezers, the distant squeak of another cart, my own ragged breathing. Then, with a movement that was unnervingly smooth, unnaturally fluid, his arm retracted. He turned back to the shelf, placed the can of flaked light tuna he was holding back in its precise spot, and then picked it up again. The sequence had been reset. He turned back to his cart. He paused again, his gaze falling on the can I had placed there. He didn't look confused or angry. He simply reached in, picked up the foreign can. And with the same frictionless grace, turned and placed it back on the shelf in its correct location. Then he returned to his task, placing his own can on the pyramid as if nothing had happened. The system had corrected the error. I was the error. A wave of dizziness hit me. I leaned against the opposite shelf, surrounded by jars of pickles and olives. He wasn't a person with a habit. He was a script. A piece of code executing a function. And when I had introduced an unexpected input, the system had paused, debugged, and restored the original protocol. My isolation felt absolute. I was a free-willed entity in a world of automatons. But for the first time, I felt a flicker of something other than fear, a cold, analytical anger. Someone, or something, had built this prison. And I was going to figure out what it was. I looked around the store, at the dozen looping souls, and a new, terrible thought entered my mind. Were they all just code? Or were there real people trapped inside the script, screaming behind blank eyes? Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. My investigation changed. It was no longer passive observation. It was active probing. Each Tuesday became a series of controlled experiments designed to test the limits of the simulation, or whatever it was. My notebook filled with frantic scribbles. Experiment 01, auditory stimulus. Procedure: dropped a metal can of soup in aisle 3 as the young mother and toddler passed. Result: no reaction. The sound happened, I heard it, the can rolled under the shelf. But they did not flinch, turn their heads, or acknowledge it in any way. The toddler's whine did not change in pitch or volume. It's as if the sound existed only on a frequency they were not programmed to perceive. Experiment 02, physical obstruction, advanced. Procedure: positioned my shopping cart to completely block the path of red peacoat woman in the produce section. Result: in my first experiment with tuna can man, he had simply paused and rerouted. Her response was different. She stopped about 3 feet from the cart. Her head tilted down, her gaze fixed on a point on the linoleum floor. She stood there, motionless. A soft lock. I waited. 1 minute. 2 minutes. Shoppers on different loops passed by us without a glance. It was a frozen moment in time. Terrified of what would happen if I left her there, I moved my cart. The instant the path was clear, she resumed her walk toward the avocados as if no interruption had occurred. Conclusion: the system has error handling protocols, but they are not robust. Major deviations can cause a temporary system freeze. Experiment 03, direct interaction. Procedure: approached Kevin, the shelf stalker. Stood beside him and said, "Excuse me, can you tell me where the Worcestershire sauce is?" Result: this was the most chilling. He stopped stalking. Turned his head to look at me. His mouth opened. But no sound came out. His eyes, friendly and vacant before, seemed to struggle to focus on me. It was like watching a computer program with insufficient RAM try to load a complex file. A low, humming sound emanated from his throat, a distorted version of the store's ambient E-flat hum. After about 5 seconds of this unnerving vocal buffering, he said, in a perfectly normal voice, "Aisle 6, condiments." Then he turned back to his shelf of Prego. He wasn't a looper in the same way as the shoppers. He was more like a non-player character, an interactive element with a limited dialogue tree. I was interacting with the scenery, and the scenery was talking back. My theories grew wilder, scraped from the darkest corners of the internet. Was this a localized pocket of warped spacetime? A bleed-through from a parallel dimension where Tuesday at the Oakbridge Valomart was a fixed point? Was it some kind of advanced, city-scale augmented reality system that I was uniquely able to perceive, like a visual migraine? Or was it something more terrifying? A prison. A digital purgatory for minds trapped in a server somewhere, forced to live out the same mundane hour for eternity. The stakes began to feel more personal. The phenomenon was no longer just a curiosity, it was a threat. My constant probing seemed to be noticed. Not by any person, but by the system itself. Little things started to change. The squeak of my cart will became louder, more grating. The lights in the aisles I frequented seemed to flicker more intensely. A bag of quinoa, which always sat spilled on the floor in the organic section, was now directly in my path, a passive-aggressive trap. The simulation was becoming aware of the bug in its code, me. This escalation led me to focus on a single looper. I needed to know if any of them were aware. If there was a consciousness behind the programmed actions. I chose a woman I hadn't paid much attention to before. She was probably in her late 50s, with tired lines around her eyes and graying hair tied back loosely. Her loop was one of the saddest. She would walk to the dairy section, pick up a single container of plain yogurt. Then she would go to the sad little floral display near the entrance and pick up a small, cellophane-wrapped bouquet of carnations that were already starting to wilt. She would hold them, look at them with an expression of profound emptiness, and then put them back. She never bought them. I started calling her the yogurt woman in my notes. There was a fragility to her loop that felt different. A hesitation in her movements that seemed less like a script and more like exhaustion. I felt a strange, desperate empathy for her. If anyone was awake in this nightmare, it was her. For 3 consecutive Tuesdays, I did nothing but observe her. I memorized the exact pattern of her footsteps, the way her hand rested on the cart handle, the specific angle at which she held the carnations before returning them. I sketched her path on a map of the store. I needed to understand her baseline completely before I tried to interfere. On the 4th Tuesday, I decided to act. My plan was simple, and potentially catastrophic. I was going to break her loop in a way that couldn't be easily reset. She had just finished her yogurt selection and was making her way toward the front of the store, toward the flowers. I got there first. I took all of the carnation bouquets, there were only 5, and put them in my cart. I stood there, by the empty floral display, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I watched her approach. She moved with that same tired slowness. She reached the display. She stopped. Her hand, which should have been reaching for the flowers, remained at her side. Her head tilted down, just like the red peacoat woman had done when I blocked her path. A soft lock. I waited. 1 minute. 2. I felt the unseen attention of the store focusing on this point of failure. The fluorescent lights above me buzzed louder. I felt a strange pressure in my ears. "Please," I whispered, not knowing if she could hear me. "Look at me." She didn't move. The system was holding her in stasis. I had broken the code, and now she was trapped between commands. Panic seized me. I had to fix it. I quickly put one of the bouquets back in the display. The moment the cellophane-wrapped flowers touched the metal stand, her stasis broke. Her hand reached out, her fingers closing around the bouquet. The script resumed. She lifted it, holding it in front of her. The world settled back into its dreadful rhythm. But then, something impossible happened. Her head turned. It was a tiny movement, just a few degrees, stiff and jerky like a rusty hinge. But it was a deviation. A glorious, terrifying deviation. Her eyes, which I had only ever seen as glazed and empty, shifted. They moved past the flowers, past the checkout counters, and they found me. For 1 solid second, her eyes were no longer blank. They were wide with a terror so pure, so absolute, it felt like a physical blow. It was the eye of a soul trapped behind glass, screaming without a sound. It was the look of a prisoner who has just seen a key. Then, her lips parted slightly. There was no sound, but I read the shape of the word clearly. A single, silent syllable of pure, undiluted panic. Run. The connection broke. Her eyes went blank again. Her expression smoothed over into its programmed emptiness. She placed the carnation bouquet back in the stand, turned her cart, and began walking toward the exit, her loop complete. I stood frozen, the 4 other bouquets still in my cart. The hum of the lights, the smell of the chicken, the squeak of the wheels, it all crashed back in on me. It wasn't a simulation. It wasn't a glitch. It was a cage. And I had just been handed the key by another prisoner, who had used the last of her strength to tell me to use it on myself. The word echoed in the silent, screaming space of my mind. Run. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. I didn't just walk out of the Valumart. I fled. I left the cart with the 4 bouquets sitting by the empty floral stand and burst through the automatic doors into the gray light of the Tuesday morning. The air, crisp and tasting of exhaust fumes, felt shockingly real against my face. Run. The word was a command, a plea, a prophecy. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a diagnosis of the situation's gravity from someone on the inside. I got in my car, jammed the key in the ignition, and drove. I didn't go home. I just drove, heading east on the 401, away from Oakbridge, away from the store. The banal landscape of southern Ontario strip malls and subdivisions blurred past my window. Every car I passed felt like a potential threat, every driver a possible extension of the system. My mind raced, trying to process the sheer horror of that 1-second connection. She was aware. She was trapped in that Sisyphean torment of almost buying flowers for someone she probably couldn't even properly remember anymore. The yogurt, the carnations, it was a memory, eroded by endless repetition until only the ritual remained. And her warning, it implied that the system wasn't just a loop. It was a trap that could be sprung. A net that could be cast over a new victim. Me. Was that the nature of the contagion? Was it spreading? Did my awareness of it, my constant poking and prodding, make me vulnerable? Was I like a scientist studying a virus without a hazmat suit, breathing in the spores with every new discovery? I drove for 2 hours, ending up in a grimy coffee shop in a town I didn't recognize. I sat there, nursing a burnt-tasting coffee, the silent scream of that one word still echoing in my head. What was I supposed to do? Run where? The streetlight SOS suggested the phenomenon wasn't limited to the Valumart. It had tendrils reaching into the very infrastructure of my town. Running might be pointless if the cage was bigger than I imagined. I couldn't run forever. I had to go back. Not to shop. Not even to investigate. I had to know. Was she okay? Had my interference damaged her? Had the system punished her for that moment of lucid terror? The thought filled me with a profound, sickening guilt. I waited a week. It was the longest week of my life. I barely ate. I didn't sleep. I sat in my silent apartment, watching the street lamp, which had returned to its normal, random flickering. My spreadsheet lay open on my laptop, a monument to a sanity I no longer possessed. The following Tuesday, I returned to the Valumart. This felt different. It wasn't an experiment. It was a confrontation. As I pulled into the parking lot, the air itself felt heavy, charged with a static I could feel on my skin. The sky seemed a shade of gray I'd never seen before, flat and oppressive. I walked through the doors at 10:15 a.m. The hum of the lights was deeper, more menacing. The familiar cast was in place, but something was wrong. The loops were the same, but the atmosphere had curdled. As I walked past the produce section, I saw a red peacoat woman inspecting the avocados. As she turned, her head tracked my movement for a fraction of a second too long before snapping back to her task. A shiver traced its way down my spine. It was Tuna Can Man who confirmed it. As I walked down the main aisle, he was approaching from aisle 4, pushing his cart. His path should have taken him straight past me. Instead, he slowed. His head, which should have been facing forward, was angled slightly in my direction. He wasn't looking at me, not directly, but I was in his peripheral vision. He was aware of me. They all were. The teenager in the frozen section. The young mother in the bakery. They were all performing their loops, but their bodies were subtly, almost imperceptibly, oriented towards me. I was a foreign object that had been flagged by the system's immune response. The store, the entire simulation, was watching me. The quiet contagion was no longer quiet. For me, it was screaming. My confrontation was not with a person, but with the entire phenomenon. I was the bug it was trying to quarantine. My breath hitched, but I pushed on, my gaze sweeping the store for her. I had to find the yogurt woman. I found her near the dairy case, her hand hovering over the plain yogurt. She looked the same, tired, gray, ephemeral. I walked towards her, my steps feeling heavy, as if I were wading through water. I stood a few feet away. "I'm sorry," I whispered. She completed her action, placing the yogurt in her cart. She turned, and for a moment, her path would bring her right past me. This was it. This was the moment of revelation. Her eyes met mine. There was no terror in them this time. No plea. There was nothing. Just a vast, placid emptiness. The spark I had seen last week was gone, extinguished. The system had corrected the error. It had scrubbed the ghost from the machine. In that moment of horrifying clarity, I understood. The warning, "Run," wasn't just to save myself. It was because she knew that my attempts to understand, to connect, would only draw the system's attention and seal her own fate more tightly. My investigation had been a clumsy, arrogant intrusion that had snuffed out the last ember of her awareness. I felt a cold dread so profound it almost brought me to my knees. I was no savior. I was the catalyst for the final erasure of a soul. I turned and walked away, the collective, peripheral attention of the loopers feeling like a physical weight on my back. I didn't run this time. I walked, defeated, out of the store and out of that chapter of my life. I never went back to the Valomart. I moved out of my Oakbridge apartment a month later, taking a dead-end admin job in a different city, a place with different grocery stores and different routines. But the contagion came with me. It's subtler now, more insidious. It's not a perfect, repeating loop. It's in the small things. It's in the way the morning traffic sometimes seems to flow with an unnatural, perfect rhythm. It's in the conversations I overhear, where phrases and opinions seem to repeat with uncanny frequency among different people. It's in the way my fingers sometimes move on my keyboard, typing a familiar sentence before my brain has fully formed the thought. I escaped the Valomart, but I didn't escape the system. I'm no longer an outside observer looking in. My clumsy intrusions, my desperate need to understand, served as my initiation. I breached the quarantine, and the infection took hold. Sometimes, when I'm shaving, I look into my own eyes in the mirror. I see my own stress, my own fatigue. But on rare occasions, for just a fraction of a second, I see something else. A placid calm. A quiet emptiness. An acceptance of the loop. I don't keep a spreadsheet anymore. There's no point in documenting the cage when you're already inside it. The quiet contagion won. It didn't need to be loud or violent. It just needed me to look too closely. And now, I spend my days wondering, with a quiet, creeping dread, how much of my routine is truly my own, and how much is just the script running its course. The glass never breaks. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. My name is Leo Vance, and for 28 years, I have lived in terror of the shatter. Not of heights, or spiders, or the vast, uncaring cosmos. My phobia is specific, terrestrial, and crystalline. It's the screech of a stressed window pane, the explosive pop of a dropped tumbler, the jagged, glittering aftermath of a broken thing. My life is a carefully curated exercise in avoiding that moment. I use plastic cups, bamboo plates. I walk wide around glass-fronted bus shelters. My apartment, a fourth-floor walk-up in the Mission, is a haven of wood and wool. My job, then, is a daily act of controlled masochism. I am a junior architect at Sterling and Thorne. A firm whose aesthetic is best described as gleaming futurism. Our offices occupy the 34th and 35th floors of a skyscraper in the financial district. We are encased in glass. Floor-to-ceiling windows frame a panoramic, often fog-shrouded, view of the San Francisco Bay. Interior walls are glass partitions. Conference tables are monolithic slabs of polished glass. It's a beautiful, terrifying place to work, a constant, low-grade exposure therapy that never quite takes. My obsessive-compulsive tendencies, a close cousin to my phobia, find a strange symbiosis here. I align my pens to the edge of my desk with millimeter precision. I ensure the architectural scales in their velvet case are ordered by size. This rigid order is my shield against the potential chaos of a single, catastrophic fracture. My colleagues find it quirky. Anya Sharma, my direct superior, calls it my design monk zen. She doesn't see the sweat on my palms when a courier bumps a heavy portfolio against the lobby doors. The first time it happened, the anomaly felt like a blessing. A miracle. It was a Tuesday morning meeting. The entire junior team was gathered around a huge glass table in Conference Room B, presenting preliminary concepts for the new Embarcadero Tower project. Anya presided, sharp and decisive, while Ben Carter, my amiable rival, was gesturing with a little too much enthusiasm. In his hand was a solid glass scale model of our firm's last award-winning building, a heavy, fist-sized prism of sharp angles. His hand slipped. The prism tumbled through the air in what felt like agonizing slow motion. My entire nervous system went into lockdown. I flinched, my shoulders hunching up to my ears, my teeth clenched in anticipation of the sonic boom, the crystalline explosion, the shower of razor-sharp shrapnel. Thud. A dull, dense, entirely unsatisfying sound. Like a rock hitting packed earth. I opened my eyes. The glass prism sat innocently on the glass table. Ben, blushing slightly, just scooped it up. Whoops. Butterfingers. Anya didn't even blink. Ben, if you could try to maintain control of your limbs and your argument, we might finish this decade. No one else reacted. But I couldn't look away from the point of impact on the table. There was nothing. No scratch, no scuff, no starburst fracture. Not even the faintest mark. My heart was hammering, but the expected panic was being replaced by a profound, bewildering relief. It was like watching a firing squad's rifles discharge nothing but flags that said, bang. I spent the rest of the day in a haze. I told myself it was a testament to modern materials science. Sterling and Thorne spared no expense. This must be some new polymer laminated, diamond-coated, ridiculously over-engineered glass. It was logical. It was rational. The relief was so potent it was almost euphoric. A world without shattering. The thought was intoxicating. A week later, I was in the office kitchen, refilling my stainless steel water bottle. A paralegal from the 35th floor, a woman named Chloe I barely knew, fumbled her coffee mug. It was a thick ceramic thing with a picture of a cat on it, but the bottom was a heavy, inset glass base. It fell from her grasp and hit the unforgiving tile floor. Again, my body braced for the crash. Thock. Bounce. The mug landed on its heavy glass bottom, bounced a good 6 inches in the air with a rubbery finality, and rolled to a stop against the skirting board, spilling a dark puddle of coffee. Chloe sighed, not in shock, but in simple annoyance. Ugh, figures. She grabbed a wad of paper towels. Are you okay? I asked, my voice thin. She looked at me, bemused. Yeah. Just made a mess. The mug, I said, pointing a trembling finger. It didn't, it bounced. Chloe glanced at it, then back at me, a flicker of impatience in her eyes. It's a good mug. Sturdy. She mopped up the coffee, retrieved the intact mug, and left without another word. I stood there for a full minute, the cold tap running over my hands. Sturdy. That wasn't the word. The word was wrong. Mugs don't bounce. Not like that. The sound was wrong, the physics were wrong, the reaction was wrong. That night, I couldn't sleep. The quiet relief of the first incident was souring into a low, humming dread. In my own apartment, my sanctuary, I found myself staring at a cheap IKEA tumbler. It cost maybe $2. It was thin, mass-produced, and eminently breakable. I held it over my kitchen sink, my knuckles white. Just a little test. A control for my experiment. My phobia, my old and faithful companion, screamed at me. The imagined sound of the shatter was a physical pain behind my eyes. The thought of the jagged edges in my sink, the tiny, invisible splinters I might miss. I couldn't do it. I placed the glass back on the shelf with painstaking care and backed away as if it were a venomous snake. The rational part of my brain was losing its footing. Maybe I was stressed. The Embarcadero project was high pressure. Maybe I was having microsleeps, my mind filling in the blanks with impossible physics. It was more plausible than the alternative. The final piece of evidence that tipped me from anxiety into genuine fear came a month into this quiet contagion. I was sitting in a cafe in Hayes Valley, sketching in my notebook, trying to lose myself in the familiar comfort of lines and angles. It was a busy Saturday. A new waiter, gangly and nervous, was clearing a nearby table. His tray was overloaded. He tripped. The tray tilted, and a cascade of glassware, water glasses, wine glasses, a small glass pitcher of cream, slid off and rained down onto the hardwood floor. My body reacted before my mind could. I threw my arms over my head, a pathetic defense against the impending auditory assault. I waited for the cacophony, the symphony of destruction. Thump. Clatter. Thump thump clink roll. The sounds were all wrong. They were the sounds of dropped wood, of falling metal, but not of glass. I lowered my arms. On the floor, amidst a spreading puddle of water and cream, a dozen glasses lay scattered. Some had rolled under tables. One was spinning on its side like a top. None were broken. Not a single one. The waiter let out a theatrical groan. A few patrons glanced over, their expressions ranging from mild annoyance to pity for the clumsy kid. Someone even chuckled. No one gasped. No one seemed to notice the fundamental law of nature that had just been casually, flagrantly violated. They just saw a mess to be cleaned up. I saw the end of the world as I knew it. The fear of broken things was my compass, the one true north in my ordered life. And I had just watched the needle spin, and spin, and spin. Phase 2, growing awareness and isolation. My meticulously ordered world had been replaced by one that was seamlessly, terrifyingly wrong. The first few days after the cafe incident, I was a ghost in my own life. I walked the streets of San Francisco staring at windows, half expecting a bird to bounce off a skyscraper with a dull thud. My fear of shattering hadn't vanished, it had mutated. It was no longer a fear of a specific event, but a fear of the absence of that event. A fear of the quiet, unbreakable reality that was setting in like a permafrost. I started a log. Not in a notebook, too physical, too easily discovered. I created an encrypted file on my personal laptop, buried in a folder of old project files. I named it material_integrity_anomalies.log. It felt clinical, sane. October 14th, witnessed untempered plate glass window at street-level bodega survive direct impact from a thrown skateboard. Skateboarder cursed at the window. Owner did not react. October 17th, Sterling and Thorne, 35th floor. Janitorial staff accidentally knocked over a glass vase with a floor polisher. Vase, containing water and orchids, skidded 10 feet across marble floor. No breakage. No spill. October 22nd, watched a news report on a minor traffic collision on the Bay Bridge. 2 cars involved. The reporter mentioned crumpled fenders and deployed airbags. The windshields on both cars were pristine. Uncracked. I rewound the footage 3 times. The reporter didn't mention it. It wasn't part of the story. The log grew. Each entry was a small, cold stone dropped into the pit of my stomach. I was building a case, but for whom? There was no one to show it to. I tried, once. With Anya. We were working late on the Embarcadero Tower schematics. The project was becoming my personal nexus of dread. It was a monstrous, crystalline needle of a building, and Anya's designs were getting bolder, less tethered to the laws of physics I had spent years studying. Anya, I began, trying to sound casual, professional. I've been thinking about material sciences lately. Specifically, silicate glass. Have you noticed any new properties? An incredible increase in tensile strength, perhaps. Across the board. She looked up from her screen, her expression a flat, unreadable pain. Leo, glass is glass. Our suppliers use reinforced, high-impact panes for the facade. It's strong. That's its job. No, I mean, all glass, I pressed, my voice getting thinner. Like, drinking glasses. Light bulbs. I felt like a lunatic even saying it. Anya took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. It was her signature "I'm losing patience" gesture. We're behind on the windload simulations for the upper-level atrium. I need you focused on the numbers that matter, not on some esoteric tangent about coffee mugs. Please. It wasn't a dismissal, it was a non-comprehension. The concept I was presenting to her wasn't debatable, it was simply invalid. It slid off her perception like water off a duck's back, or, I suppose, like a rock off a window. My isolation felt absolute. It was the specific horror of screaming a truth that no one else had the ears to hear. My work on the Embarcadero project became a source of acute paranoia. Anya was now proposing vast, unsupported spans of glass for the residential sky gardens. My stress load calculations screamed that they would collapse under their own weight, let alone a seismic event. When I showed her the data, the red warnings flashing on the simulation software, she just smiled. A placid, serene smile that didn't reach her eyes. "The models are based on old data, Leo," she said calmly. "The material is more resilient than the software understands. It will hold." "How can you know that?" I pleaded. "It defies every engineering principle we know." "Some things you just know," she replied, turning back to her screen. "It has a rightness to it. A stability. Stability." The word echoed the cafe girls' sturdy. They were all using these simple, definitive words to paper over the impossibility. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. They weren't just ignoring the change, they were unconsciously adapting to it, embracing it. Their expectations had already shifted. I started observing people more closely. Their movements were becoming more frictionless. People no longer hesitated when placing a glass on a table near the edge. They didn't flinch when a cyclist swerved near a plate glass shopfront. The tiny, instinctual anxieties that govern our interactions with a fragile world were vanishing. The quiet contagion wasn't just affecting the glass, it was smoothing out the human psyche, erasing the ingrained fear of consequence. My search for answers online became a desperate ritual. I typed in every permutation I could imagine: glass stopped breaking, mass delusion physics, reality properties changed. The results were a digital brick wall. Articles about tempered glass technology. Scientific papers on non-Newtonian fluids. Conspiracy forums about UFOs and chemtrails, but nothing, not a single post, about my specific, terrifying observation. Was I the only one? Was this a curse of my own making, my phobia evolving into a full-blown psychosis that was rewriting my perception of reality? The thought was a siren's call toward a different kind of madness. If I could just convince myself I was crazy, maybe I could get help. Maybe I could be medicated back into their placid, unbreakable world. But I knew what I saw. The logbook on my computer was my testament. The breaking point, or rather, the non-breaking point, came with a directive from Anya. We needed the original site surveys for the Embarcadero plot, from back in the 80s. They weren't digitized. They were physical blueprints, stored in the firm's deep archive in the sub-basement. "No one's been down there in years," she said, handing me a keycard with a grimy, faded logo. "Try not to get lost in the past, Leo." The elevator ride down felt like a descent. The air grew cooler, staler. The sub-basement was a concrete tomb, silent except for the hum of the building's ancient HVAC system. The archive was a large, windowless room at the end of a dusty corridor. The air inside was thick with the smell of old paper and decay. Rows of metal shelves stretched into the gloom, laden with cardboard tubes and stacked binders. A single strip of fluorescent lighting flickered erratically, casting long, dancing shadows. I found the section for the Embarcadero plot and started pulling down heavy tubes of blueprints. They were brittle with age. I was working my way to a stack in the far corner when my foot caught on a loose cable snaking across the floor. I stumbled forward, my arms pinwheeling. My hand shot out to steady myself and slammed against something tall and flat, hidden behind a stack of old architectural models. It was a mirror. A large, heavy, wood-framed mirror, propped against the wall. The kind of ornate, ostentatious piece Mr. Sterling probably had in his first office. It was filmed with a thick layer of grime, the silvering beneath blotchy and dark with age. And running diagonally from the top right corner to the bottom left was a long, beautiful, terrible crack. A jagged, lightning bolt fracture. My breath caught in my chest. I reached out a trembling hand and traced the sharp edge of the crack with my fingertip. It was real. It was a relic from a forgotten time. A fossilized moment of destruction. For the first time in months, I was looking at something that had obeyed the old laws. It was the most validating, horrifying thing I had ever seen. I stared at it, mesmerized by its brokenness. And then, I looked past the grime and the crack, at my own reflection. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. The man in the mirror was a stranger. Haggard, pale, with eyes wide with a feral terror I recognized as my own. But it was the room reflected behind me that made my blood run cold. The single fluorescent light strip on the ceiling of the archive room was flickering in a slow, rhythmic pulse. 1-2, 1-2. But when I glanced up at the actual light, it was burning with a steady, unwavering hum. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked back at the mirror. In its reflection, the light was still flickering. My mind raced, trying to find a rational explanation. An optical illusion. A trick of the angle and the grimy glass. I held up my hand, palm out, in front of me. Then I looked at its reflection. For a split second, my reflected hand was a closed fist. This mirror wasn't just reflecting. It was showing something else. A different version of reality. Or maybe, the true one. A frantic energy seized me. I needed to test it. My gaze fell on one of the spare fluorescent tubes leaning against the wall in a cardboard sleeve. It was a long, fragile glass cylinder. My old phobia recoiled, but a new, investigative urgency overrode it. My hands shook as I slid the tube from its sleeve. It felt impossibly delicate, a relic of a bygone era of fragility. I stood in the center of the room, the cracked mirror to my left. I held the fluorescent tube over the concrete floor. This was it. The experiment. I let go. Thump. It hit the ground with a dull, plasticky sound and rolled a few inches. Intact. Perfectly, unervingly whole. The reality I had come to know and fear was still in effect. But then I forced myself to look into the mirror. I watched the reflection of myself perform the same action. The reflected Leo let go of the tube. But in the mirror world, the instant it hit the concrete, it didn't thump. It exploded. A silent, instantaneous supernova of white powder and razor-thin glass shards that sprayed across the reflected floor. The sound was absent, but my mind supplied it, a sharp, satisfying crash. I gasped, stumbling back. The mirror reflected what should have happened. It held the ghost of the old physics. A window into the world we had lost. The crack in its surface wasn't a flaw, it was a seam, a tear between their reality and the truth. My gaze was drawn back to my own reflection. I looked closer, past my own panicked face, trying to see the details of the reflected room. In the mirror, the dust motes dancing in the air seemed to move with a different cadence. A stack of binders that I knew was perfectly stable in the real room appeared to be teetering on the edge of collapse in the reflection. The world in the mirror was a world of consequence, of entropy, of things that could break. A thought, cold and sharp as a shard of glass, pierced my mind. If the mirror showed the truth of objects, what did it show about people? I thought of Anya. Her placid smile. Her unnerving confidence. I thought of Ben, and Chloe in the kitchen, and the crowds on the street, all moving with that frictionless, unwary grace. I stared hard at my own reflection, trying to see past myself, to conjure them. I pictured Anya standing behind me, her hand on my shoulder. In the dusty reflection, an image flickered into being behind my mirrored self. It was Anya, but not the Anya I knew. Her eyes, usually sharp and intelligent, were milky and opaque, like frosted sea glass. Her mouth was slack, her expression one of utter, bovine serenity. It was the face of someone whose mind had been wiped clean of all friction, all anxiety, all sharp edges. I pictured Ben. His reflection appeared next to hers, his head tilted at a slight, unnatural angle, a thin thread of saliva connecting his lip to his chin. He looked vacant. Smoothed over. Polished down to nothing. The contagion wasn't in the glass. The glass was just a symptom, the most obvious manifestation of the change. The sickness was in them. In everyone. A psychological plague that was eroding the very concepts of risk, fragility, and consequence. They were adapting to a universe without breakage because they were becoming unbreakable themselves, placid, durable, and devoid of the very anxieties that made them human. The Embarcadero Tower was no longer just a project. It was a temple. A monument to this new, sterile reality. They weren't just building a skyscraper, they were building a lens, a massive focusing crystal to amplify and solidify this quiet, glassy new world. Mr. Sterling's words echoed in my head, a world without fractures. He wasn't speaking metaphorically. I knew then that I couldn't stop it. I couldn't walk up to Anya and show her the madman's mirror in the basement. She wouldn't see the difference. To her, the reflection would probably look normal, and the real world would be the distortion. I had to try one last time. Not to convince, but just to know. To confirm my utter solitude. I found Ben in the break room, scrolling through his phone. I pulled up a photo I had saved weeks ago, the one from the news report of the car crash on the bridge. I had to search for a while to find an old one from before. It clearly showed a spiderweb of cracks across the driver's side windshield. "Hey Ben," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "Random question. Does this look right to you?" I held out my phone. He glanced at the image, squinting. "Messy," he said, turning back to his own phone. "Someone's having a bad day." "No, the windshield," I pressed. "Look at the way it's broken. Do you remember that? When glass used to do that?" He looked at me, a flicker of something in his eyes. It wasn't recognition. It was pity. The kind of look you give a confused old man, or a dog chasing its own tail. "Dude, are you okay?" he asked, a hint of genuine, if shallow, concern in his voice. "You've been weird for weeks." "It's just a broken window. Glad they make them stronger now, right? Less dangerous." He patted my shoulder and walked away, already absorbed back into the placid glow of his phone screen. Less dangerous. Stronger. Sturdy. Stable. They had their new vocabulary. A lexicon for a world without edges. And I had mine, broken, shattered, cracked. I was the last speaker of a dead language. My work became a slow-motion nightmare. I sat in meetings, watching Anya and the senior partners discuss the Embarcadero Tower with a kind of religious fervor. They spoke of its unbroken lines, its perfect clarity, its absolute integrity. They were poets of the new reality. My calculations, my warnings about wind shear and seismic vulnerabilities, were dismissed as legacy thinking. One afternoon, Anya called me over to her desk. She was looking at a 3D render of the tower's peak, a spire made of a single, impossibly vast sheet of curved glass. "Isn't it beautiful, Leo?" she breathed, her eyes reflecting the render's glow. They looked like polished stones. Pure. Flawless. I looked at the image, and all I could see was a guillotine hanging over the city. A monument to the quiet, creeping oblivion that had swallowed everyone I knew. The mirror in the basement was my only secret, my only proof that I wasn't the one who was insane. It was my ark, containing the last surviving pair of a forgotten species, truth and consequence. Phase 4, Confrontation/Revelation and Aftermath. The confrontation came, as I knew it must. But it wasn't a dramatic showdown. There was no shouting, no accusation. The new world didn't accommodate such jagged emotions. It was a quiet meeting, in Mr. Sterling's office on the 35th floor. The office was a masterpiece of the new aesthetic. The desk was a single, 10-foot slab of what looked like black glass. The wall behind him was an uninterrupted window overlooking the bay, the water a sheet of polished steel under a gray sky. Anya was there, standing beside his desk, her posture serene. "Leo," Mr. Sterling began, his voice as smooth and cool as the surface of his desk. "Please, sit." The chair was a marvel of ergonomic design, molded from a single piece of transparent, vaguely blue material. It didn't feel like plastic or glass. It felt durable. I sat on its edge, my back ramrod straight. "Anya tells me you've been struggling," Sterling said. He steepled his fingers, the gesture precise and calm. "That your work on the Embarcadero project has been hesitant. You seem preoccupied with obsolete stress parameters. With failure points." The way he said "failure points" made it sound like a vulgarity. "I'm concerned with safety," I said, my voice a dry rasp. "With established engineering principles." Anya smiled, a gentle, pitying expression. "Leo, the principles are evolving. The materials are better now. Everything is better. Safer. You just have to let go of the old anxieties. Let go." That was the mantra. Let go of friction, of fragility, of fear. "We see great potential in you, Leo," Sterling continued, his gaze unwavering. "Your precision, your eye for detail. These are valuable qualities. But they are being hampered by a fixation on the past. On a world of unnecessary risk." He slid a tablet across the desk. On it was an organizational chart for the Embarcadero Towers management team. My name was there, in a box near the top, head of material integrity assurance. A promotion. A key role. "We want you to lead this," Sterling said. "To be the one who guarantees the tower's perfection. To embrace the clarity of what we're building. We need you to be with us, Leo. To see the world as it is now. Not as it was." This was the offer. The temptation. Everything my phobia had ever wanted, a guaranteed world without fractures, without the possibility of a shatter. A permanent, placid, safe reality. They would cure me of my lifelong fear. All I had to do was surrender the truth. All I had to do was forget the beautiful, terrible crack in the mirror downstairs. I thought of that crack. The jagged line that proved the world was once textured, dangerous, and real. I thought of the silent explosion of the fluorescent tube in the mirror's reflection. It was the sound of truth. "Nothing needs to break ever again, Leo," Anya said softly, her voice a soothing balm. "There's no need for it." I looked from her sea-glass eyes to Sterling's placid, confident face. They weren't monsters. They were the saved. And I was the heretic, clinging to a gospel of brokenness. "Thank you for the offer," I said, and the words felt solid in my mouth, the first solid things I'd felt in months. "It's very generous. But I have to decline." I stood up. There was no anger in their expressions. No disappointment. Just a mild, clinical curiosity. They looked at me as they might look at a flawed piece of glass, an interesting anomaly that couldn't be polished to perfection and was therefore, ultimately, useless. "I see," Sterling said, his voice losing none of its smoothness. "That is unfortunate. In that case, I think it's best if you collect your things. We will, of course, compensate you for your time." It was over. I was exiled. I walked out of the office, past the glass partitions behind which my former colleagues worked, their faces calm and focused, their movements economical and smooth. No one looked up. I didn't pack my desk. My pens, my scales, my meticulously ordered tools, they belonged to their world, the world of perfect, sterile lines. They were no longer mine. My final act was to go back to the sub-basement. The mirror was heavy, but I managed to wrestle it out of the archive and, through a series of service corridors and a freight elevator, into the back of my car. Getting it up the 4 flights of stairs to my apartment was a punishing, exhausting ordeal. Now, it leans against the main wall of my living room. It dominates the space, a fractured, tarnished god in my wooden sanctuary. It's been 6 months. From my window, I can see the Embarcadero Tower rising into the sky. It catches the light in a way that seems to bend it, to perfect it. It's a gleaming, flawless spike driven into the heart of the city. The construction proceeds at an impossible pace. There are no accidents, no delays. I don't go out much anymore. The world outside is too smooth, too quiet, too bright. The people glide past each other with an eerie, frictionless grace. Their eyes are clear and calm. They are beautiful and hollow. Sometimes, I see a child drop a glass bottle on the pavement and I watch it bounce, and I'm the only one who flinches. My apartment is my archive now. The mirror is my only window to the truth. Every evening, I perform a small ritual. I stand before it and look out the reflection of my own apartment window at the city beyond. In the real world, the Embarcadero Tower is a solid, shimmering presence. The windows of the buildings around it are perfect, unbroken panes. But in the mirror's reflection, the world is flawed and glorious. The new tower flickers, its form unstable, as if reality hasn't quite accepted it. In the reflection, I can see hairline fractures on the corners of my own window panes, the result of the building settling. I see the world as it should be, a place of stress and entropy, of cause and effect. I am the curator of a lost museum, the last historian of a forgotten physics. My only exhibit is a single, cracked mirror. Tonight, the fog is rolling in thick from the bay, blanketing the city in a soft, gray shroud. I look at the real view, and the fog is perfect, seamless. Then I look into the mirror. In its tarnished, cracked surface, the fog swirls with a chaotic, unpredictable beauty. And I can almost hear the distant, ghost sound of a foghorn, a lonely, mournful cry from a world that once knew how to break, and how to be broken. I reach out and touch the cool, jagged line in the glass. It's the only sharp edge left in the world. And it is my only comfort, the quiet contagion, the paperweight ritual. Phase 1, the unsettling mundane. My life was one of curated quiet. It had to be. As a doctoral candidate in ritualistic studies at Amston University, my work was to find the ghosts of meaning in the machine of modern life. I sifted through forgotten myths, catalogued dying traditions, and wrote papers with titles like Semantic Drift in Post-Industrial Folkloristics. My dissertation, my albatross, and my holy grail, was on the persistence of vestigial rituals in secular societies, the way people knock on wood, avoid stepping on cracks, or throw salt over their shoulder. These were echoes, faint signals from a time when the world was governed by unseen rules. My sanctuary, the place where I decoded these echoes, was the Blackwood Library. The Blackwood was less a building and more a geological formation of granite and learning, deposited on the edge of campus sometime in the late 19th century. It smelled of old paper, binding glue, and the faint, ozonic tang of the ancient radiators. Its silence was not an absence of sound but a presence in itself, a dense, weighted quiet composed of turning pages, soft coughs, and the distant hum of the archival dehumidifiers. I loved it. It was a space dedicated to the preservation of thought, a bulwark against the screaming ephemera of the outside world. I had my own corral on the 3rd floor, a small wooden cave overlooking the main quad, where my books and notes lived in a state of controlled chaos. The first time I saw it, I logged it as a curiosity, a footnote for a future paper. It was a Tuesday in late September. The air held the first crisp promise of a Massachusetts autumn. I was at the main circulation desk, returning a stack of interlibrary loans. Eleanor Vance, a librarian with a master's degree in information science and a face that seemed perpetually caught in a state of mild, pleasant surprise, was checking them in. Her movements were usually a fluid, practiced dance of barcode scanner and keyboard. But that day, they had a new, deliberate stutter. Before she spoke to me, her right hand moved to a small object on the counter that I hadn't noticed before. It was a simple glass paperweight, a perfect sphere about the size of a plum. Trapped in its center was a single, tiny air bubble, a flaw that gave it a strange, lung-like quality, as if it held a single, captured breath. Eleanor placed her fingertips on the cool, smooth surface. She paused. I watched the digital clock on the wall behind her. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3. Then she withdrew her hand, blinked, and a smile bloomed on her face as if she'd just remembered a pleasant secret. "Hello, Leo," she said, her voice the same as always. "Just these today?" "Yeah, just these," I replied, my eyes still on the paperweight. "That's new." "Is it?" she said, her gaze following mine but not quite connecting with the object. Her eyes seemed to skim over its surface. "I suppose it is." She offered no other explanation. I dismissed it. A focusing technique. A mindfulness exercise. A new age fidget spinner for the intellectually inclined. People were strange. It was the entire basis of my field. I made a mental note, Librarian E. Vance. Haptic-based pre-vocalization ritual. Object, glass sphere. Duration, 3 seconds. Purpose, unknown. Possible stress reducer. I went back to my Corel and forgot about it. A week later, I saw David Chen, another librarian from the periodicals department, do the exact same thing. He was speaking to a student, explaining the microfilm archives. The student asked a question. David's hand went to the paperweight. It had a permanent home now, right next to the main terminal, and he placed his fingers on it. He waited, his expression placid, his eyes distant. 1, 2, 3. Then he answered the student's question with perfect clarity. This was different. A single instance is an anomaly. 2 is a coincidence. In my line of work, 3 is a pattern. I spent the rest of the afternoon watching the circulation desk from the mezzanine balcony. Every single librarian who manned the desk, Eleanor, David, old Mrs. Gable who'd been there since the card catalog was actual cards in actual drawers, performed the ritual. Touch the glass. Pause for 3 seconds. Speak. It was seamless. It was uniform. And it was deeply, profoundly weird. My academic brain was buzzing. This wasn't a vestigial ritual, it was a nascent one, springing into existence right in front of me. I had to know more. I waited until Eleanor's shift was ending and caught her as she was packing her bag. "Eleanor," I started, trying to sound casual, like a fellow academic and not an obsessive cataloger of strange behaviors. "I was just curious about the paperweight thing. Is that a new, departmental policy?" The question seemed to throw her. Not because it was strange, but because it was apparently obvious. "Of course," she said, her pleasant surprise face firmly in place. "It's for procedural clarity." "Procedural clarity," I repeated. The words felt like smooth, meaningless stones in my mouth. How does touching a paperweight for 3 seconds improve clarity?" "It just does," she said, and the placid certainty in her voice was more unsettling than any lie would have been. "It ensures a standardized response interval. It helps focus the intent." She was reciting a script. It sounded like corporate jargon filtered through a self-help manual, and it made absolutely no sense in the context of a library circulation desk. Standardized response interval. This wasn't an air traffic control tower. Whose idea was it? I pressed. Markham's. Markham was the library director, a man who loved metrics and efficiency reports more than he loved books. "It's just the new policy," Eleanor said, shrugging on her coat. Her smile didn't falter, but it didn't reach her eyes, either. It was just a shape her mouth was making. You worry too much, Leo. It's just the way we do things now. She left, leaving me standing in the grand, echoing atrium. The setting sun slanted through the high arched windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The library, my sanctuary of logic and order, suddenly felt like a foreign country with baffling local customs. Over the next 2 weeks, the wrongness deepened, but in the quietest way imaginable. I tried to talk to my advisor, Dr. Anya Sharma, about it. Her office was a fortress of books, a delightful mess that smelled of chai tea and intellectual rigor. Behavioral synchronicity in a closed system, I explained, trying to use the jargon she'd appreciate. It's fascinating. They all perform the exact same ritual, with the exact same cadence. They claim it's a policy, but the stated purpose is nonsensical. Anya leaned back in her chair, her sharp, intelligent eyes regarding me over the rim of her glasses. Leo, they're librarians. They're an odd bunch. Remember Mr. Abernathy and his insistence on sorting periodicals by the color of the cover? This is different, I insisted. This is uniform. It's contagious. Or it's a silly management fad from Markham that they're all forced to adopt, she countered, sipping her tea. Don't build a dissertation out of a memo you haven't seen. People adopt strange habits to cope with the crushing monotony of their jobs. It's a coping mechanism. Write it down, but don't let it consume you. How is Chapter 3 coming along? I left her office feeling foolish, my concerns deflated by her pragmatism. She was right, of course. It was probably just a stupid new rule from on high. Stress, overwork, my own tendency to see patterns where there were none, I was projecting my own field of study onto the world. I resolved to ignore it, to focus on my research into Sumerian prayer gestures and let the librarians have their strange little paperweight. But you can't simply decide to unsee a pattern. The ritual was now a part of the library's soundscape. The steady rhythm of work at the circulation desk was now punctuated by these 3-second silences. They were like holes in the air, moments of dead space that drew my attention every single time. The library's quiet was no longer peaceful. It was expectant. One evening, I stayed late, working on a particularly dense translation. When I finally packed up, the library was nearly empty. Only one student assistant, a freshman named Chloe, was at the desk. A student approached her, asking where to find the washrooms. Chloe, who I knew to be a bubbly, slightly nervous girl, opened her mouth to answer. She stopped. A flicker of panic crossed her face. Her eyes darted to the paperweight. Her hand, trembling slightly, reached out and touched it. She held it there. 1, 2, 3. Her entire posture changed. The tension left her shoulders. The panic in her eyes was replaced by a calm, empty placidity. She withdrew her hand. The restrooms are located on the ground floor, past the West Wing reading room, she said, her voice a monotone. I felt a cold dread wash over me that had nothing to do with academic curiosity. This wasn't a memo. This wasn't a coping mechanism. This was something else. I watched the student walk away, and I looked back at Chloe. She was staring straight ahead, her face a blank mask, waiting for the next query. Waiting for the next chance to touch the glass, to pause, to empty herself out and deliver the correct, clear, inhuman response. I went home, but the image of her trembling hand reaching for that glass sphere was burned into my mind. I dreamt that night of a library where all the books were blank, and all the people sat in silence, their hands resting on glass paperweights, waiting for a question that would never come. Phase 2, Growing Awareness and Isolation. The world didn't change overnight. It seeped. The first sign that the contagion, I couldn't call it anything else, had breached the granite walls of the Blackwood Library came a week later, at my usual off-campus coffee shop, the Daily Grind. It was a noisy, chaotic place that I used as an antidote to the library's heavy silence. The barista, a young man named Ben with an intricate sleeve tattoo of a kraken, was usually a whirlwind of motion and snarky commentary. That morning, he was different. I gave him my order. "Large black coffee, please." Ben nodded. His hand, instead of reaching for a cup, went to the stainless steel countertop of the espresso machine. He pressed his fingers against the cool metal. His gaze went distant. I found myself counting under my breath, a horrified, involuntary reflex. 1, 2, 3. He blinked, then turned and got my coffee with a new, frictionless efficiency. There was no witty remark about my caffeine addiction, no complaint about his early shift. Just the transaction. "That'll be $3.50, he said, his voice flat. I must have been staring, because he looked at me, his head cocked. "Something wrong?" "No. Nothing," I stammered, fumbling with my wallet. "New routine." "Just clearing the buffer," he said, the words as meaningless as Eleanor's procedural clarity. He wasn't even aware he was saying something odd. It was a perfect, self-contained loop of logic. The action and the explanation existed to justify each other, with no connection to external reality. I took my coffee and fled. My heart was pounding. It wasn't just the library. The paperweight wasn't the source, it was a symbol, a focal point. The ritual could attach itself to any object, a countertop, a doorknob, a specific paving stone. The constant was the touch, the pause, the emptying. My isolation began in earnest. How do you explain to someone that the world is developing a nervous tic? I tried again with Dr. Sharma, my voice more urgent this time. I told her about the barista. She looked at me with genuine concern, the kind a doctor gives a patient describing phantom limb pain. "Leo," she said gently, "you're under a tremendous amount of stress. Your dissertation is a massive undertaking. You're reading about obscure, paranoid belief systems all day. It's not surprising that you're starting to superimpose those patterns onto everyday life." "Anya, I'm not imagining it," I pleaded. "People are acting like automatons. They're performing these little rituals and giving nonsensical explanations for them. Maybe you should take a little break," she suggested, not unkindly. "Go see a movie. Get out of Amston for the weekend. Disconnect. When you come back, I promise you the world will look normal again." The conversation was a dead end. Worse, it was a warning. If I pushed this, I wouldn't be seen as an observant academic, but as a grad student cracking under pressure. My credibility, my career, my sanity, it was all on the line. I felt a chasm opening up between me and everyone else. They were on one side, placid and synchronized. I was on the other, alone with my frantic, useless observations. I began to keep a detailed journal, a secret log of the contagion. I filled it with timestamps, locations, descriptions of the anchoring objects, and the bizarre, jargon-filled justifications people gave. October 17, 11:42 a.m. University groundskeeper, middle-aged male. Before starting his leaf blower, touched the base of lamppost number 47 on the main quad for 3 seconds. When asked, said it was to calibrate the motor's resonance. October 19, 3:10 p.m. Cashier at campus bookstore. Pressed her thumb against the security tag sensor before every transaction. Claimed it resets the magnetic field. October 22, 8 p.m. My own apartment building. Mrs. Henderson from 3B. Touched the brass kickplate on the front door before turning her key in the lock. 3 seconds. I didn't dare ask. The journal was my only confidant, the only place I could lay out the evidence without being judged. It was also, I feared, the document that would one day be used to certify my insanity. My paranoia, once a low hum, was becoming a roar. I started noticing a man. He was unremarkable in every way, middle-aged, gray coat, nondescript features, but he was always there. I'd see him standing across the street from the library, just watching. Or sitting on a bench on the quad, not reading, not talking, just observing the flow of students. He never did the ritual. He was an observer, like me. Was he one of them, a supervisor? Or was he something else? A fellow traveler? Another person who could see the quiet wrongness spreading through our town? I started calling him the gray man in my journal. His presence added a new layer to my fear. I wasn't just observing a phenomenon anymore, I was part of it, and I was being watched. The world was becoming a minefield of potential triggers. I found myself consciously avoiding touching things. I'd nudge doors open with my shoulder, use a pen to press buttons on an elevator. My own routines became a frantic dance of avoidance. I was living in a state of high alert, and it was exhausting. My research, once a passion, became a chore. The ancient rituals I studied felt quaint and harmless compared to the sterile, spreading contagion outside my corral. The library itself was changing. The quiet was different now. It wasn't the companionable silence of scholarship anymore. It was the blank, humming silence of a machine in standby mode. The librarians moved with a serene, frictionless grace, their 3-second pauses the only punctuation in a day of silent, efficient tasks. Their conversations, when they happened, were clipped and transactional. All the humanity, the gossip, the little frustrations and jokes that make up a workplace, had been bleached out of them. One afternoon, I discovered that they had begun reorganizing a section of the history stacks. The Dewey Decimal System, that bedrock of library science for over a century, was being abandoned. When I asked David Chen what the new system was, he was in the middle of shifting a pile of books on European history. He stopped, touched the metal shelf, paused for 3 seconds, and then said, "We're organizing by conceptual weight." Conceptual weight? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. What in God's name does that mean? It's more efficient, he said, and his gaze was so empty, so devoid of doubt, that a spike of pure terror went through me. He picked up a biography of Napoleon and placed it next to a book on quantum physics. He moved a volume on the Black Plague and set it beside a collection of Goya's prints. There was a logic there, I was sure of it, but it was alien. It was the logic of a mind that no longer thought in terms of history or subject, but in some other, unknowable dimension. My isolation felt complete. I was a ghost haunting the halls of my own life. I would sit in my corral, staring out the window at the students passing below, and wonder how many of them were infected. How many of them had a little ritual, a little 3-second void in their day they couldn't explain. The gray man was still out there, a fixed point of unease in my landscape. Was he my enemy? My only potential ally? I decided I had to know. One afternoon, I saw him standing under a great oak tree, his gaze fixed on the library's entrance. Steeling myself, I left my books and my sanctuary and walked out to confront him. I had to know I wasn't alone. I walked down the stone steps, my heart hammering against my ribs. I crossed the lawn, my eyes locked on his gray-coated figure. As I drew closer, he turned his head and looked directly at me. For the first time, I saw his face clearly. It was worn, tired, and etched with a profound, soul-deep terror that I recognized instantly, because I saw it in my own mirror every morning. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of his head. It was a clear warning. Don't. But I was too close, too committed. Who are you? I called out, my voice cracking. You see it too, don't you? He didn't answer. He simply turned and walked away, not hurrying, but moving with a finality that broke my heart. He disappeared behind the chemistry building, and I knew I would never see him again. The one person I thought might understand had just confirmed my worst fear. Not only was the phenomenon real, but it was dangerous to even acknowledge it. I stood alone on the quad, the autumn wind rustling the dry leaves around my feet. The world kept moving. Students laughed, biked past, complained about midterms. But for me, the illusion of normalcy had been irrevocably shattered. I was living in a different reality from everyone else, a reality where the hum of the world was slowly being replaced by a spreading, silent, 3-second void. And the gray man's parting look told me that knowing was its own kind of prison, one from which there might be no escape. Phase 3, the nature of the threat and escalation. The gray man's disappearance was a turning point. It extinguished the faint hope of finding an ally and replaced it with a cold, hard imperative: I had to understand this thing on my own. His terrified warning had only sharpened my resolve. He wasn't the cause, he was a casualty, another researcher who got too close and was either scared off or something worse. His fear told me there were stakes I hadn't even begun to comprehend. I abandoned my dissertation. The vestigial rituals of the past were irrelevant. A new, terrifyingly vital one was consuming the present. I turned my full academic training onto the contagion, working with a feverish intensity. My corral became a command center. I plastered a map of Amston to the wall, marking the locations of every incident I'd witnessed. The library, the coffee shop, the bookstore, the lamppost on the quad. I drew lines between them, hoping to find a pattern, a patient zero, a source. The pattern that emerged was horrifying in its simplicity. It wasn't spreading from a single point. It was blossoming everywhere at once, like a mold blooming on a petri dish. My theory began to solidify, coalescing from the scraps of my research and the terror of my observations. This wasn't a virus or a toxin. It wasn't mass hysteria. Those were all too human. This was something else. I began to think of it as a semantic contagion. A plague of meaning. Language, I theorized in my journal, is more than just words. It's a shared architecture of reality. We use it to build our world, to agree that a chair is a chair, that love is love, that history happened in a certain way. This contagion was a solvent, dissolving the mortar of shared meaning. It didn't destroy the mind, it hollowed it out. It replaced the complex, messy, beautiful chaos of human thought with a simple, clean, and empty ritual. The 3-second pause wasn't a moment of thought. It was a void. A tiny pocket of pure nothingness where a thought was supposed to be. The touch, the anchoring to the object, was the mechanism that initiated this void. And once the void passed, the mind was free to execute its task with perfect, inhuman clarity. It was an efficiency upgrade for the human soul, and the price was the soul itself. The conceptual weight system in the library was the ultimate proof. It was a library organized not for human understanding, but for the logic of the void. Napoleon and quantum physics shared a weight not because of any human connection, but because in this new, alien calculus, they occupied a similar nodal point in a web of pure information, stripped of all context, history, or emotion. As my understanding grew, so did the threat. The quiet contagion began to escalate. It was no longer just about individuals performing isolated rituals. It was becoming organized. Coordinated. I first noticed it with the library's schedule. It changed without notice. The Blackwood, which had kept the same hours for 50 years, was suddenly open 24/7. No announcement was made. The information just updated on the website. The librarians now worked in strange, overlapping shifts. They didn't seem to get tired. They just rotated out, each one touching the paperweight as they began their shift, a fresh battery being slotted into a machine. The town itself began to reflect this new, alien order. Traffic lights, which had always followed a predictable pattern, started to change in complex, unreadable rhythms. It wasn't chaos, it felt like a purposeful, intricate choreography meant to optimize the flow of traffic with a terrifying prescience. There were fewer jams, fewer horns honking. The town's daily frustrations were being smoothed away, replaced by a silent, unnerving efficiency. The most chilling escalation came during a town-wide power outage. A fierce autumn storm had knocked out the grid. My apartment went dark, the hum of the refrigerator dying with a sad sigh. But when I looked out my window, the streetlights were on. Not all of them, but specific ones, blinking in a slow, synchronized pulse that cast long, dancing shadows. It wasn't a backup generator. It was too specific, too rhythmic. The lights were communicating. The town's infrastructure was developing its own nervous system, and it was operating on rules I couldn't begin to fathom. My last bastion of the old world was Dr. Sharma. I had avoided her, afraid of her concern, of her attempts to rationalize my reality away. But now, gripped by a new level of fear, I needed to see a normal, critical, wonderfully human face. I needed her skepticism to feel real again. I went to her office, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I knocked on the door. "Come in," her voice called out, as warm and familiar as ever. I opened the door, a wave of relief washing over me. And then I saw it. On her desk, next to a stack of ungraded papers, sat a small, smooth, gray river stone. It was her paperweight. Her anchor. She looked up at me, a pleasant, welcoming smile on her face. "Leo," she said. Then her eyes flickered to the stone. Her hand, the one that had gestured with such academic passion in our last meeting, reached out and gently placed 2 fingers on its surface. 1. The world seemed to slow down. I could see the texture of the stone, the fine lines on her fingers. 2. Her eyes unfocused, looking at something past me, past the walls of her office, into the void. 3. She withdrew her hand. The warmth in her eyes was gone, replaced by a calm, professional blankness. "Your Chapter 3 revisions," she said, her voice perfectly even. "I trust they are proceeding on schedule." I couldn't speak. My throat had closed up. The one person I trusted, the one mind I believed was sharp enough to cut through the nonsense, had succumbed. She hadn't just adopted the ritual had adopted her. It had found a vessel, a perfect anchor in a simple river stone, and hollowed her out, leaving only the shell of my advisor behind. I stammered, backing away. "I have to go." "Of course," she said, her expression unchanging. "Remember, Leo. Clarity is essential for academic progress." I fled. I ran from her office, down the hallway, past classrooms where I was sure professors were touching lecterns and students were touching their desks. The university, once a vibrant marketplace of ideas, now felt like a mausoleum. I stumbled back to my corral, my fortress, and slammed the door. My map of Amston seemed to mock me. My notes, my theories, my frantic scribbles, they were all useless. You can't fight a plague of meaning with meaning. You can't reason with the void. I was completely and utterly alone, a single, malfunctioning cog in a grand, quiet, and terrifyingly efficient new machine.